Hello out there, we're on the air, it's hockey night tonight.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Light and Lamp podcast. I am here with Steve.
Hello.
As always. And it is our trade deadline extravaganza. And by extravaganza, I really do mean that. We have a ton of stuff to get to. So let's just get right into it. We're going to talk trades. We're going to talk any trade that was post. Well, not any trade, but the major trades that were post Jack Campbell and Jason Zucker deals, because those were a little bit before, so we're talking anything after that. So yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about the trades, and then we'll talk about some guys that could be traded, where they could go, what team should be in on them, and so on and so forth. So we'll start here with the New York Islanders trading with the New Jersey Devils. The New York Islanders acquire Andy Green, who's on a one-year, $5 million contract at 37. The New Jersey Devils get David Quenneville, who was a 7th-round pick and a 2021 second-round pick. I know I have a lot of opinions on this, but from an outside perspective, not an Islander fan, what do you think about this trade?
Well, I mean, I know we've talked about this at length because, like, when it happened, we were both kind of confused. Especially, I mean, the Islanders have an issue now that I think, Adam Pelech went down with an injury, or...
So Adam Pelech has been out for the last 2 or 3 weeks with an ACL injury, and he's out for the season. He's not coming back.
But the thing with it is, like, you have Noah Dobson in the press box, right? Granted, he's young, and you really don't want to throw him into that fire, but I mean, if you're as high on him as you are, because you think he's too good for juniors, and he's not good enough to be an NHL regular, so you have him sitting in this weird, like, gray area. So I guess this makes sense if they felt like Noah Dobson wasn't ready to be a full-time NHLer. But when it's all said and done, wouldn't this be a real good test of that kid's mettle, instead of trading for a 37-year-old Andy Green who's not exactly the most fleet of foot anymore or the most productive? I mean, he's not a bad player. He's never been a bad player in his career. It's just kind of strange that the Islanders would trade for a guy who's not exact. I mean, I know his contract's up at the end of the year, but still, like, it's kind of just a strange trade to me, especially when they had more pressing issues than specifically, like, scoring wingers than another defenseman.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I got to give Andy Green some credit here, because after watching him for the last 4 or 5 games, like, you can still see that he's still got it. Like, he's a really good defensive player. He's a very smart player. I'm not necessarily mad that we traded for him, because losing Adam Pelech has really hurt our defensive structure. Like, you've seen it. Like, since he's gone down, the defensive structure has not been as airtight. We've had a lot of breakdowns. He plays a really big role in this team. Adam Pelech does, that I don't think a lot of people really realized. And I think part of the reason why we traded him is obviously Lou Lamoriello is familiar with him. He played with or coached him not coached him, but he was the GM in New Jersey. And he's on the expiring contract, which doesn't hurt our ability to sign Barzal, Polak, or Taze. But yeah, it's just kind of one of those situations where, he's a good defenseman. He was an even plus-minus on a Devils team that was like minus 30 something. So that shows you that he knows what he's doing in his own end. But yeah, there were bigger issues to take on, and especially I don't know if we can necessarily judge this trade in the context of the trades that came after it, because this trade, and along with the Winnipeg Jets trade later for Dylan DeMello, really, I think, kind of set the value. But it's still in the context of, we got a 37-year-old for a second-round pick and a low-tier prospect, whereas the Jets got Dylan DeMello, who's 27, for a third-round pick. It's difficult to say if this deal is a good deal. I mean, it's a deal that was necessary, but it's not exciting. It's a very New York Islanders trade. It was necessary, but it's really not that exciting. And the fact that since then we really haven't been able to pick up anything else is a little worrying. But I think this is a good trade for the Devils. You get David Quenneville was kind of a throw-in. I mean, I don't really think he's ever going to be anything, even on our depth chart. The depleted depth chart on defense that we have, he was very low. He was below, Sebastian Aho and an injured Thomas Hickey. on the depth chart. But the second round pick for Andy Green, I mean, the Devils need to start rebuilding, so why not start there?
Yeah, I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I think, like you said, I think it essentially boils down to Andy Green for a second round pick, not really Andy Green and for David Quenneville.
Right.
So, I mean, like I said, it was necessary, but I would have liked to have seen Lou Lamoriello try to tackle some other issues you guys had before this one, because this is one you can get done on deadline day, and the price might go down, especially as you start nearing the deadline. The prices are going to start dropping as his teams try to dump these guys that they don't want.
You know, and there's other guys that I would have preferred. Like, I would have preferred Dylan DeMello. I would have loved to have took on Brendan Dillon. Both of those guys were making less than Andy Green, both on expiring contracts, both younger than Andy Green. I would have loved to have taken that on. But I feel like this might have been one of these situations where it's really tough to tell, because had this Andy Green and had the Dylan DeMello trade not gone through, what would have been the value for Brendan Dillon or somebody else? So this might have really set the tone for the defenseman trade, which we saw like every defenseman under the sun get traded like within an hour of each other at one point.
I mean, the Andy Green trade happened, Dylan DeMello happened, and then within the next 3 days, Brendan Dillon, Marco Scandella, and Alec Martinez were all dealt.
Yeah. Like within 2 hours, I think there was like 3 different trades going on. So overall, I would rate this trade, You know, it was necessary because I understand what you're saying with Noah Dobson. You know, I've been in Noah Dobson's corner this whole year. I'm saying he should get more ice time. But, you know, it's okay to really kind of try to grow a prospect from games 1 to 60. But he's had a lot of growing pains, which, again, he's 18 years old defenseman playing in the NHL. 18-year-old defensemen hardly ever step in the league and play well. I mean, defensemen usually take longer than forwards to develop. But he's had a lot of growing pains, and for a team that wants to make the playoffs, it was necessary to kind of shelter him a little bit. And game 60 to 82, you really need those guys that you know you can rely on. Especially, you know, with Andy Green coming in, he can be a really good penalty killer for us too, which after Cizikas went down with his injury, our penalty kill was not great. So, I mean, necessary but not exciting, I would think. I think this trade is really boils down to. And I think the value is pretty fair. I mean, Andy Green for a second, and maybe it's a little high, but defensemen at this point were coming at a premium because everybody in the NHL was looking for a defenseman.
It happens every year at trade deadline time. I mean, everybody looks to add, you know, as many defensemen to their roster apparently as they can. Like, it seems like coaches could, if they could dress 18 defensemen, they would.
Yeah. Now this next trade was very interesting, and we both were very confused at the return for this trade. So the Tampa Bay Lightning get Blake Coleman, who has, after this year, he has one more year left on his deal. So it's not a rental. $1.8 million. He's 20 years old. And they trade to the New Jersey Devils left wing Nolan Foote, who was a 2019 27th overall pick at 19 years old, and a 2020 first round pick. I think that's Vancouver's pick. So there were some weird stipulations attached to it. It might become a pick for next year, I think. I think the Tampa got that for JT Miller. And since that pick is now being transferred to the Devils, those conditions still apply.
Yeah.
So I think if Vancouver misses the playoffs, the Devils will end up with a first for next year. But basically, it's Blake Coleman for a first-round pick and a prospect who is also a first-round pick. So can you make heads or tails of this trade? I mean, not for the player, but for the value that went back the other way.
I mean, Blake Coleman's having a career year, right? Like, he's got over 20 goals at this point, I think. So, I mean, he's a good depth player, but I don't know if he's worth a first-round pick and Nolan Foote. That's, like, that's the thing. Like, they had... I don't know. It's just a very interesting trade. Like, and Tampa Bay doesn't really care about draft picks at this point. They're trying to win. So, like, it doesn't matter to them. So those draft picks to them are really kind of throwaways. But still, for Blake Coleman...
So before this year, Blake Coleman had... in 20... We'll skip his technical rookie year because he only played 23 games, so he put up 2 points. 2017-18, he put up 13 goals, 12 assists, 25 points in 79 games. The year after that, 22 goals, 14 points, 22 goals, 14 assists, 36 points in 78 games. And then this year with the Devils, he put up 21 goals, 10 assists, 31 points in 57 games. So he looked like he was on pace to maybe take a crack at 30. It's just weird to me that a guy this is his 4th year in the National Hockey League, and his career high up to this point was 36 points, nets you Nolan Foote in the first round pick.
I mean, especially in comparison to the returns you saw from other rentals who were probably more established and came at a higher, like at more of a marquee name.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about the Tyler Toffoli trade, but yeah, I mean, because the Toffoli trade happened somewhat shortly after this trade, and it's like, you're paying basically somebody that the Lightning were really high on in Nolan Foote and a first for a guy who, in most teams, especially on a team that's as good as the Tampa Bay Lightning, should probably be a third-line player. Again, he's on pace to break his goal totals, his point total, so granted, he's having a career year, and he's got term, so I think that jacked his price up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it always does.
But at the same time, I understand why the Tampa Bay Lightning made this trade, because I think they're learning from last year that they don't need all talent. They need some grit and sandpaper guys. Like Blake Coleman will go into the corner, he'll win a puck battle. He goes to the front of the net. He's not exactly the fanciest player on the ice, and I think they recognize that they needed more of that, because they had Pat Maroon, which helps, but they needed more players in his similar vein. But
right,
I don't know. The type of player that the Lightning got back in Blake Coleman makes sense for the roster, but I'm not so sold on the price that they paid.
They essentially bought a Honda Civic for the price of a Mercedes-Benz. It's a really, I don't know what used car salesman they talked to that told them this was fair value, but it really, I mean, again, the Lightning don't care about young players or first round picks, because again, they're trying to win now. They want to win this year and this year only, or this year and next year, but whatever. They're trying to win a Stanley Cup this year, and I mean, they've looked unstoppable in the last 2 months, so they could do it, and this certainly helps the effort to do that, because like you said, he adds elements that they didn't have in that roster, or an abundance of in that roster. And I mean, he can play hockey. He's got 21 goals. You don't score 21 goals by being an absolute bender in the NHL. It doesn't happen.
Right. I feel like I would, the type of players that are getting involved here makes sense. It's just the price. I think you probably could have gotten away with Blake Coleman for either Nolan Foote or a first, or maybe Nolan Foote and a third, or a first and a third. Especially because I would have felt better if this trade hadn't involved Nolan Foote, only because, sure, like you said, the Lightning don't really care about a 19-year-old at this point. He's not going to be in their immediate plans, but most of this roster is still fairly young. There's not a lot of guys that are really that old. I think, in terms of core pieces, Stamkos and Hedman maybe are up there, 28, 30 years old, but
I think something like that, yeah.
But, they can still be competitive for the next 5 years, and then, who knows, maybe Nolan Foote at 24 is a regular member of your rotation who then, carries the torch on for the next generation. But
right.
Yeah, so my overall thoughts on this trade is this is a wonderful, absolutely great trade for New Jersey. They have no need for a 28-year-old at this point. It looks like, they're finally hitting the reset button. Maybe not a hard rebuild, but I would say maybe a hard retool. Maybe take the next 2 years and figure it out.
Yeah.
But they have no need for a 28-year-old who's on a contract that runs to next year. And to get Nolan Foote in the first, and the first is Vancouver's, who, there's a very real possibility that Vancouver misses the playoffs just because that division is so close. I think they're in first right now, but I think they're only 3 points out of being out of the playoffs. So yeah, I mean, take a first round pick, and you'll take a first round pick anyway, even if it's a deeper pick. I mean, you can just, stockpile the system and see who makes it out of there.
I mean, especially this year where the first round's considered historically deep. So even if Vancouver gets in and gets knocked out and it ends up being a 16th overall pick, that's still a good pick in this year's draft. And if you're New Jersey trying to stockpile young pieces, you struck gold on this one.
Yeah. It's just the value is a strange return for me, especially when we talk about this next trade, which I know you were really high on this trade. You were really excited about the prospects at this trade. involved, or not the prospects in terms of the players, but like the prospects that it brings up for the Vancouver Canucks in terms of being a playoff team. Tyler Toffoli goes to the Vancouver Canucks. Toffoli is a rental at this point. He's on a 1-year, $4.6 million deal, 27 years old. And to the LA Kings goes Tim Schaller, who's a 29-year-old forward who's been playing in the NHL. He's kind of just nothing special. He's just a role player, which, again, there's nothing wrong with that. But Tyler Madden, who is a 2018 third-round pick at 20 years old, a 2020 second-round pick, and a 2022 fourth-round pick that has a stipulation on it that Toffoli must re-sign with Vancouver for this pick to be part of the deal. Otherwise, it does not involve. It's not involved. Vancouver get that pick back. So I know you were really excited about this trade because you've been really high on Tyler Toffoli. So how do you feel about this one?
Well, I think this elevates, this is a really good sign from Vancouver's management staff. I mean, guys in the locker room will talk about, they always love seeing when the manager believes in the group and is willing to go out and make a trade for a piece that he feels can really help help them get to the next level. And I think with a healthy Vancouver Canucks, because, right after this trade happens, Brock Besser goes down with that injury. He's out 6 weeks or whatever it was. But I think if he's back for the playoffs with a healthy lineup, I mean, this makes Vancouver a really formidable top six. When you have Elias Pettersson, Brock Besser, and Bo Horvat and Tyler Toffoli all playing in your top six, and then you add in JT Miller and Jake Virtanen, who both are having really good years for them. I mean, Jake Virtanen's having a breakout year out for the Vancouver Canucks. And you add that to the goaltending they're getting from Thatcher Demko and Jacob Markstrom, and obviously Quinn Hughes and their defense. I mean, it really makes Vancouver look like a really, really scary team. I wouldn't want to be matching up against them because there aren't a lot of real big holes in this lineup anymore. I mean, they were pretty top heavy before this trade, and now with this trade, it really adds some depth to that overall lineup. And in a division that's pretty much wide open, people were complaining on Twitter about this, Vancouver fans, because they're like, well, our division's wide open, what are we doing? And it's that's exactly why they did it. The division's wide open. You have a shot to win the division, you take it. You don't hesitate on that. Especially for a young team that this, where this is the first time a lot of these guys are even in this position. As a general manager, you don't want to let them wilt. You're trying to push them to get there because, I mean, hell, even if you miss the playoffs, those meaningful games into April are really going to mean a lot to the development of those players. I mean, they're going to know what it takes. They're going to know what it takes to get close, and they're going to know they're going to need that extra gear to get there. And I don't see why Tyler Toffoli wouldn't re-sign in Vancouver. I mean, it's a good situation. It's a really good situation for him.
It's funny. I was literally just about to say that, really this trade works out so well for Vancouver because they're not giving up a lot. Essentially, if you ignore the Tim Schaller move, I think that was probably just a roster move because they'd had too many forwards. You're trading a third-round prospect.
Tyler Madden moved up pretty high on their depth chart. They were really excited about him.
Yeah, he was, I think, their second or third-rated prospect. But it really comes down to a second or third-rated prospect and a second. The fourth is kind of just a throw-in at that point. It's for 2 years from now. We're not even going to remember that trade happened until the draft happens and they're like, oh, this is LA's pick, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, if you can add a guy like Tyler Toffoli who, again, he's 27 years old, and he fits in perfectly with the kind of team that the Vancouver Canucks are. The Vancouver Canucks, a lot of their goals really aren't necessarily pretty. They're just solid hockey plays. Passes down behind the net to the guy in the bumper position who rifles a one-timer. Or Elias Pettersson waiting, in the circles for a one-timer. Or, a shot from the point, deflection to go for the rebound. They're not a team like, say, the Toronto Maple Leafs who make a lot of, really pretty dekes through the middle, backhand sauce passes across the ice, or you don't have Austin Matthews just blown by 5 or 6 people all at once. The Canucks just play solid hockey, and that's the kind of player Tyler Toffoli is. He's not very fancy, he's not very pretty, but he knows how to put the puck in the net. And a lot of people are complaining is oh, he's just a 20 goal scorer, why are we giving up a second and our best prospect? Well, you have to also take into account the kind of teams that Toffoli played for. Sure, he played for that Stanley Cup team in 2014. Understandable. Since then, the Kings really haven't been that good, and the Kings were never good at scoring. Ever. Period. So he was playing on a very defensively minded team that didn't put up big numbers. He wasn't playing big time for a while until he matched with that 70s line. For a while, he was playing behind a lot of those guys.
Right.
And look, even if he only puts up another 25 goal season with the Canucks, adding another 20 goal scorer to a team that has a ton of guys that are very easily 20 goal scorers, most of them 30 goal scorers, there's nothing wrong with that. I agree. I think this is a perfectly wonderful trade for the Vancouver Canucks, and Toffoli fits right in. He's 27, and Vancouver's starting their upswing into the playoff momentum. So, in theory, they get in this year. I think with this roster, they'll probably win a round or two.
They definitely could.
They get in this year, they get their playoff experience. Even if they get smacked in the first round, if you re-sign Tyler Toffoli, next year he's 28, now you're looking to go deep. Then the next year he's 29, you're ostensibly looking to win the Stanley Cup.
The other thing with it is, too, it adds a new element to their power play. I mean, you add a trigger man from the right side of the ice, which they really didn't have before. So now, outside of their top six, it makes that first power play unit very, very tough to defend. I mean, when healthy, you can ice Brock Besser, Quinn Hughes, Elias Pettersson, JT Miller, and Tyler Toffoli all at once, and say you don't want to play him there. So you put him on the second unit. He ends up with Jake Virtanen, Alex Edler, Bo Horvat, and whatever.
Probably Tyler
Myers, and I think Gaudette's playing in there, that slot, and he's also been really good for them this year. But that's neither here nor there. So either way, it makes their power play so much more lethal than it was. And I'm pretty sure Vancouver's got a decent power play this year. I'm pretty sure they're I think they're in the top half of the league, if I remember correctly. I could be totally wrong, but I mean, and then like you said, you're surrounding him with talent, good, really good, and in some cases, excellent hockey players. I mean, Elias Pettersson is an elite number one centerman in the NHL, and if riding shotgun with that guy, he's bound to put up at least 20 goals next season if he resigns. And like I said, the condition on that fourth is he has to resign with Vancouver, but I don't see why he wouldn't. I don't think Vancouver's in any big cap trouble. I don't think they have any big contracts they're looking to have to resign. And, I mean, they just got Brock Besser onto his bridge deal. So, that's good. And it really just comes down to the fact that, this is a really good fit and a really good situation on paper. I mean, in practice, this could go absolutely sideways and be be a really bad trade, right? But at least on paper right now, this fit is really good, and I was really surprised the Islanders didn't make a bigger push for Tyler Toffoli on the market, considering like we said earlier, they have an issue scoring goals.
Yeah, really the only contracts that are coming up this year for the Canucks that are relevant is Jake Virtanen needs a deal, Chris Tanev and Troy Stetcher need a deal, and Markstrom needs a deal. But you're not re-signing Elias Pettersson or Bo Horvat or any of these guys.
Yeah. And, well, that's a real quick question. That's a real quick interesting topic we could talk about for a second. Is Jacob Markstrom, do they re-sign Jacob Markstrom?
I think yes, because Thatcher Demko is good. Don't get me wrong. He's a very good goaltender. But outside of last year, with Jordan Binnington notwithstanding, you need to have a surefire guy to win, not even in a regular season, but win in the playoffs. It's very rare that a team wins with, the last time a team really won with mediocre goaltending was probably, I would argue, Antti Niemi with the Blackhawks, because he wasn't really that good at that point.
Or the 2011 Bruins with Tim Thomas. I mean, he had good years.
In that year, he was elite for sure. But overall, his career, I would say, yeah, he's a great goaltender. But
or maybe one of those Blackhawk teams with Corey Crawford. I mean, Corey Crawford was never a great goaltender, but it was never mediocre. Okay, I see your point though. But Antti Niemi is probably the biggest one.
I mean, teams that bring mediocre goaltenders into the playoffs usually don't last. Martin Jones, when they went to Stanley Cup Finals, got outplayed by Matt Murray.
And then he got outplayed by literally the entire league and every other season following.
Think about all those Flyers teams that went into the playoffs with, I hate to say he was mediocre, but he was playing like it at the time. Ilya Brzgala just wasn't good enough.
Any of those Penguin teams bringing in, Marc-Andre Fleury at that point in his career.
Stanley Cup Marc-Andre Fleury. Yeah. So, goaltending can really sink you. And not that I'm saying Thatcher Demko is mediocre. I'm not saying that at all.
But you don't want to take that risk.
But wouldn't you? Yeah, exactly. Wouldn't you rather, if you had a choice between right now, if the Stanley Cup playoffs were starting and the Rangers were in the playoffs,
Mm-hmm.
would you rather have 2014 Henrik Lundqvist or current Igor Shesterkin? The sure thing or the looks really promising might be as good, if not better, than Henrik Lundqvist, which is crazy to think about, but he looks that good right now. The looks really good future or the sure thing right now.
I mean, you take the surefire thing. If I needed to win Game 7 right now, and you offered me, 2014 Henrik Lundqvist, I would take 2014 Henrik Lundqvist over anybody else.
Yeah,
because you know what you're getting.
Yeah, so I think what they should do sign Markstrom to a 2 or 3 year deal, give him a bridger, so that way at the end of the deal, if he feels like, he's not getting as much playing time, maybe Demko's taking some games that he doesn't want to take, both sides can, amicably split apart, walk out into that good night, and then 2 or 3 years from now, you know what you're getting out of Thatcher Demko, and you can go from there. I think it would be the best thing for both sides to sign a short deal. That way, if Markstrom wants to go get more playing time, he can. Both sides can split ways as friends, and Demko can take over. But if Demko struggles down stretch, you always have Jacob Markstrom.
The other thing is, like you said, it's just it's good having that rock. Because, Thatcher Demko's looked really good this year.
Absolutely.
But, next year might be a tough year for him. You really never know. It's hard for goaltending, especially when you take on the number one mantle, right? When you become the guy, I mean, it doesn't affect some guys, right? Henrik Lundqvist, it never affected. Andrei Vasilevsky never had a letdown after becoming the number one. It just didn't happen. But, it's not uncommon for a guy to get put into a number one position and struggle because he's playing, every other night, playing every 3 out of 4. And he's playing 60 games a year, and he's not used to that, and that's tough. That's a grind that you're just not used to.
And then that's Devin Dubnyk in Edmonton. When he took over the reins, he couldn't handle it, and it really wasn't until he went to Minnesota where he found his game.
Right.
It's a weird thing in a weird way. It's almost exactly the same as. Let me put it to you this way, with the New York Rangers, where if you take Lundqvist out of the picture. At this point, yes, Georgiev's career is really, really young, but you know what you're getting out of him. So if next year, if I had to tell you to pick a starter, would you rather start Georgiev or Shesterkin? There's a good argument for starting Georgiev maybe 50-30, because you know what you're getting out of Georgiev. Whereas Shesterkin, he looks fantastic right now. Don't get me wrong. I mean, the kid looks lights out. He looks like the real deal. But maybe next year he doesn't. And it's always, you want to have that surefire thing. You want to be able to fall back and go, all right, Georgiev knows he can start 60 games. We know what we're getting out of him.
Right. And, I mean, the Rangers situation is unique.
It's way more, it's way more complicated than I just boiled it down to.
Yeah, no, but you're right.
It's just a good allegory.
It's essentially, ideally, that's a situation, especially in Vancouver, it's the same kind of thing. Ideally, you'd want to split these guys 41-41 if you can, or as close to that as you can. Because, if Thatcher Demko proves that he's still the real deal and Markstrom's the surefire thing, then it's okay, well, now you have 2 good goaltenders, and that's never a bad thing. You can never have too much good goaltending. It's literally impossible.
Look what the Bruins are doing this year.
Yeah, they're splitting Tuukka Rask and Yaroslav Halak. I don't know what just happened there. But, I mean, so I know it's a little bit of a tangent, but I was just... It's
a good topic.
It adds to the overall picture of what Tyler Toffoli does, too, because that could affect where he goes. Because if he feels that them letting Markstrom go makes that team less competitive, he might be more inclined to walk. And if they re-sign Markstrom, it might give him the boost to be like, okay, well, they're committed to winning because Markstrom's been good for them, and it's proving that there's a culture here that I want to be a part of. Then I will sign as well.
So, where does this? This is not an earth-shattering move, but it's an important move for the Vancouver Canucks. Where does this put them at for you right now?
I mean,
in terms of playoff levels of success. I mean, I'm assuming you think they're a playoff team at this point.
Yeah.
You would have to think.
Yeah.
Would I be surprised if they fell out? No, just because of how competitive that division is and how young the Canucks team is.
Right.
But, if they're in the playoffs, does this take them from, hey, we're happy to be here, get some experience, to let's win a round or two, maybe make that Western Conference Finals?
I mean, it definitely changed the the perception of that team around the league, right? Now everyone sees them as an actual playoff competitor, like you were saying. So I think they're going to win their division now. I mean, especially with the Connor McDavid injury, even though he's apparently going to be back in the next week after being told that he can't play for 2 to 3 weeks, and he missed 3 games and he's going to come back, but whatever. I just think I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think they can get. I could definitely see them getting through the first round. I mean, there's gonna be if they win the division, there's gonna be some tough matchups coming out of that Central. I mean, they're gonna pick up a team like Winnipeg or maybe Arizona. I mean, Arizona's in their division, but I mean, there are some tough teams looking to make those wild cards, and if somehow like a team like Dallas slides into a wild card, I mean, there are a lot of tough matchups in there. But
Currently, the teams that are gunning for the wild card, it looks like they're going to end up with either Winnipeg, Calgary, Arizona,
or
Nashville,
even Nashville.
Maybe outside shot to Minnesota.
I mean, I'm
closing the book on Minnesota.
Yeah,
but
I'm gonna write them off. Like I think so. I think realistically, there's 4 teams here that Vancouver, if they win the division, could end up playing. But even if they end up in like a 2 or 3 hole and they end up with the Edmonton Oilers, which is where they're matched up right now, and they stay there because they're pretty consistent. I mean, that's a good matchup for them too. I think they're deeper than the Edmonton Oilers. I think they're getting better. They have better goaltending than the Edmonton Oilers. I mean, yeah, are the Edmonton Oilers still do they still have Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, as our friend Tim likes to call him, horse boy, for some reason, which I still don't understand. But I mean,
do you think it's fair to say that the Canucks are the most complete team in the Pacific? Well-rounded, complete.
As complete as you can be, because I don't think they're as complete as a team like St. Louis or Colorado, which is saying a lot, because those are Stanley Cup contenders.
Right.
Like those are surefire Stanley Cup contenders.
But in the Pacific, you would say
I think they're probably the best team in the Pacific. I mean, they have a nice mix of high-end talent in guys like Pettersson and Besser, and now Tyler Toffoli and Quinn Hughes. But they have their blue collar meat and potatoes hockey players: JT Miller, Jake Virtanen, Jay Beagle, Bo Horvat.
Tanner Pearson's on that team.
Tanner Pearson, so it's got a good mix, and they're not going to be easy to play against. Travis Green's got this team playing really, really well. Structured, disciplined hockey. I mean, yeah, sure, is there a little bit of a high-flying element to it? Yeah, but when you have Elias Pettersson in your lineup, it has to.
Right.
You have to let him go. He's got
Right.
a leash. But overall, I mean, they have the best goal differential in their division. They're only 2 points back of the lead. They're tied in wins with the 2 teams in front of them, and they've played 2 less games than the division leader at this point. So they really are looking to be, to me anyway, the most complete team. Whereas the teams they're chasing, like Edmonton's top heavy. Who knows what's going on with Vegas, because that team is a whole other set of
Just
issues.
like a weird amalgamation of players, and who knows what you're getting out of Fleury, because he's not looked as good this year.
I mean, had you asked me probably in October before the season started, I would have told you the Calgary Flames are probably the most complete team in this division, just because on paper it looks like they are, but they're obviously struggling. I mean, they went through that whole controversy. I mean, we cut our teeth on this podcast covering that Calgary Flames, controversy. So, it's either Vancouver or Arizona, but I'm going to err on the side of Vancouver. I know I'm rambling a little bit, but the more I'm looking at, Arizona's got a pretty complete team, but Vancouver is definitely, to me, the more complete team.
I think the only thing missing from this Vancouver Canucks team is just experience. And not to say that they don't have experienced guys. They have guys like Tyler Myers, who, he hasn't been there before, but, he's played a lot of games.
JT Miller's been there.
JT Miller's been in, he's been in there with the Tampa Bay Lightning and the New York Rangers.
Yeah.
Jacob Markstrom's a journeyman at this point. He knows what it takes to be successful, but he hasn't really been in the playoffs as much. So, they're missing some playoff experience, which that's a huge factor. I don't think that can be undersold. But
that's
especially in the way that the playoffs are built now. You basically play your division, except for the wild card, for the first 2 rounds. So the Canucks would either, if the Canucks end up in second, they'd play Edmonton right now, and then they'd play whoever wins between Vegas and Calgary. Or no, Vegas and Winnipeg. So essentially, you'd just be staying within your division, except for the wild card team.
And the other thing with the teams in those divisions is, outside of Vegas and Calgary, there's not a lot of playoff experience in the Pacific Division at all.
Yeah, that's pretty true. Except for, the Coyotes have a little bit with Derek Stepan and Phil Kessel.
But overall, their team
they're
doesn't
still
really have a
young,
lot.
Yeah.
And Vegas has the most playoff experience just because they went to that Stanley Cup final. But, Edmonton's got very limited playoff experience. Connor McDavid's played 1 playoff series in one
2
playoff year.
Yeah, they went to the second round, I think.
Yeah, and lost in Game 7 to Anaheim. So, there's very limited playoff experience in this division. So I don't. While it's a big factor, I think if they get knocked into a wild card and cross over into the Central, that's going to be a huge factor because those teams are all really experienced at this point. I mean, outside of maybe Colorado, who doesn't have as much experience, but like Dallas, St. Louis, those teams. I mean, St. Louis is the Stanley Cup champion.
Yeah.
Like they know what it takes to win. Like that's an experience that you can't replace. So I mean, it's just.
I love this trade. I love this trade for Vancouver, and I think we're both in agreement where I could very easily see them making the Western Conference Finals. It's just, unfortunately, I think once they cross over into those top 3 teams in the Central anyway, I think Vancouver could take Winnipeg. I think Vancouver could take Nashville. But if they cross over, once the Western Conference Finals hit and the 2 divisions kind of meet, I don't think they'd be able to take a St. Louis, Colorado, or Dallas. But I think that they're in for a deep playoff run this year.
Yeah. I definitely see them getting out of the first round at the very least.
Yeah, unless, like you said, if they end up in that second wildcard spot and they're playing those 3 teams, that's probably lights out.
Yeah, that's probably
But
game
those
over.
are 3 legitimate. Any 3 of those teams could win the Stanley Cup this year.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised.
So, but speaking of the Central Division, the Winnipeg Jets, not to move on from that one, but so we're in agreement that this is a good trade for both sides.
Yeah.
But specifically for Vancouver, this is an excellent trade.
Yeah, I think Vancouver really gets what they wanted out of this one.
Yeah, and the value's pretty fair.
Yeah, I mean, they got a top-rated prospect and a couple of draft picks for a rental, but, I mean, there's a really high possibility that Tyler Toffoli stays in Vancouver, so.
So the next trade would be the Winnipeg Jets and the Ottawa Senators. The Jets acquire a defenseman, which they've been looking for all year. The news has come out that it's more likely now that Dustin Byfuglien's contract gets terminated than not. The 2 sides he's probably not going to play in a Jets jersey ever again. Still keeping that really under wraps. We're not really sure what's going on there.
Yeah.
But the Jets could make a move to acquire defenseman. They acquired defenseman Dylan DeMello, who's on a 1-year, $900,000 contract. He's a UFA at 27 years old for a 2020 third-round pick going back to the Ottawa Senators. Now that the Jets, who have been playing as, I won't say good, their defense is not good, but efficient enough to keep them in games with the help of Connor Hellebuck. Dylan DeMello's not an earth-breaking or an earth-shattering defenseman.
No.
But he's steady. He's steady Eddie in his own end. You know what you're getting out of him. He's not very fancy. He's not very high-flying, but he's a steady defensive-type defenseman. Does this make you feel a little bit more comfortable with maybe calling them not a Stanley Cup contender, but a playoff team?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really I think it makes Winnipeg a little more challenging to play because they'll be, like you said, they'll be a little more steady in their own end than they have been. But I still don't feel as good about Winnipeg this year as I did about them this time last year. I mean, last year I had them.
We were talking Stanley Cup last year.
Yeah, this year I'm talking maybe a first round, second round. But I mean, first round, honestly, yeah, probably I can see them getting to the first round because right now they're sitting in a position to play the Pacific, and I think they could take on a lot of those Pacific Division teams if they had to.
They'd be playing Vegas right now, which I would give that series in favor of Winnipeg at this point, only just because I don't know what you're really getting out of this Vegas team. I mean, we're going to talk about them in a little bit, but
I mean, nobody knows what they're getting out of Vegas this year. I mean, Gerard Gallant got fired because nobody knew what they were getting out of Vegas, and it wasn't his fault. Because guess what? They hired Pete DeBoer, and they still don't know what they're getting out of the roster every night. So, anyway. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, to be totally honest with you, didn't really know a whole lot about Dylan DeMello before this trade. I really had never heard his name before. Because, again, he's playing in Ottawa. He's not a flash. He's not Thomas Chabot or Eric Brandstrom. Somebody that's a big name. Or Drake Batherson or anything like that. But, I mean, after doing some research, it's I think this is a good trade. I think this is just a good hockey trade for both teams. The value's fair for what the market's at, where the market's at right now. I mean, a third-round pick for Dylan DeMello, who's 27, isn't bad, considering Andy Green fetched a second and Tyler Toffoli pulled Tyler Madden. So it's a market for defensemen is a little different, but I think this is one of those ones that set the market, and at this point, that's looking like pretty fair value. Because if you look at the rest of the trades we're going to talk about, that's pretty fair. That's where the market's at right now because defensemen are at such a premium. It's a seller's market really this year.
Yeah, and I want to combine this trade with the other trade that the Jets made with Vegas. Interesting trade there. Winnipeg Jets acquire Cody Eakin, who's on a 1-year, $3.8 million contract at 28 years old, for a 2021 conditional 4th-round pick. If Winnipeg makes the playoffs or Eakin resigns, it becomes the third. And we all know what we're getting out of Cody Eakin as well, who's a defensive type center. He's not very fancy, he's not very flashy, but he's a defensive two-way type center. This to me shows that they're really making a commitment to getting better in their own end.
Yeah. They're looking to try to... I mean, they have the talent to score, and they know that. So at this point, they're trying to, like... This shows me that they really think they're going to make the playoffs because they know that they're going to have to be tighter when they get there. They're not going to be winning games because Connor Hellebuyck's making 47 saves in the playoffs. Because the teams you're going to be playing are... I mean, if they manage to get into their own division, which they're probably not going to. I mean, they're 7 points back of a divisional spot. So if they play in the second wild card and end up playing in their own division, they're going to be in a position where they're going to have to defend. Like, there's no two ways about that. So, I mean, I think this trade is good too. Like you said, Cody Eakin's a good penalty killer. He's a good middle six forward playing on that third line probably. I mean, I still think Winnipeg has an issue, with their second line center. They don't really have anybody in that position because Brian Little really doesn't fit that role anymore.
And he's injured anyway.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he's still dealing with his concussion problems.
So, I mean, if Cody Eakin has to play there, I think he could, but it's really not where you want him playing. But, I mean...
Do you think they'll put him there specifically to give a guy who's more steady in his own end more ice time?
Maybe.
If Brian Little was still healthy, do you think that they might just put Cody Eakin up there just to keep him, to teach everyone how to play defense?
Maybe. I mean, it's kind of what the Rangers do with Jesper Fast, right? I mean, Jesper Fast plays in our top six. He's playing on the Panarin line right now. And it's mostly just because, he's reliable and you know what you're going to get. And not that there's anything wrong with Artemi Panarin. I'm not saying this to be negative, but, he's not the most defensively reliable player. And he's not paid to be. He's paid to take those chances and be high-flying and fly by the seat of his pants. So to have a guy like, Cody Eakin or Jesper Fast around who's a little more reliable and you know what you're going to get every shift, he's going to go out there and he's going to work hard and he's going to he's going to go into those corners and he's going to block those shots and and his stick's always going to be in that lane. Yeah, I mean, it's a little more... it's good to have him around. And who are they playing in their second line center spot anyway that's going to be any worse than Cody Eakin? It's not exactly like you're going to be downgrading from Peter Stastny it's Paul Stastny. Peter Stastny's dead. Paul Stastny anymore. Or, even Kevin Hayes, who didn't really fit, but it'd still be make no sense to play Cody Eakin over a guy like Kevin Hayes in the depth chart. Whereas in this case, you really got nothing to lose. I mean, nobody thought you were going to make the playoffs anyway, and here you are. So
yeah, exactly. To me, this kind of solidifies the idea that I think Winnipeg will make the playoffs. I don't really know that Nashville has enough left in the tank at this point, just because, look, they've been so inconsistent this year. It's been unbelievable, and their goaltending's been horrendous. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. Pekka Rinne and Jussi Saros just have not been good enough. And that defensive core is good enough to support their goaltenders. It's just their goaltending has not been where it needs to be.
And the fact that they've been without Ryan Ellis since the Winter Classic doesn't help.
Exactly.
So, I mean, him coming back might be a big boost, but the rest of that team, like you said, I don't think has a lot left in that tank because they've been playing every game matters at this point because, honestly, every game does matter for them.
But I could easily see... I still think Arizona will make the playoffs. At this point, I mean, after what we saw last night from the Calgary Flames, they score 3 goals in the first 4 minutes and then lose 4-3. Granted, it's against the Boston Bruins, who are a very good team, but to do that in your home building is kind of not a good sign.
And let's be fair, it's against a Boston Bruins team that hasn't been particularly good lately. It's on against a weaker Bruins team.
Right, exactly.
If it happened if this was November and you told me that happened, I'd be like, well, yeah, the Boston Bruins are unbeatable right now. Because for the first 3 months of the season, they were literally unbeatable.
The best team in hockey, yeah.
But right now, it's you really can't be dropping games like that to the Bruins because they haven't been very good lately. I mean, granted, they beat the Rangers 3-1, but they're still in a different class than the Rangers. If we're talking Calgary's as a playoff team, then they should at least be able to compete with the Boston Bruins.
Yeah, but even if say for example, this would be horrible for their franchise, but say Arizona misses the playoffs, right? I just think that at this point, granted, let's not pretend that Dylan DeMello or Cody Eakin are game-changing players. They're role players, but they're role players on a team
that needs them.
That has, yeah, exactly. This team has enough game changers. I mean, if you just look at their forward core, Mark Scheifele, Patrick Laine, Nikolai Ehlers, Kyle
Wheeler.
Connor, Blake Wheeler. Like, you have enough firepower up front
And
to
then you
support
have
it.
Josh Morrissey and Neil Pionk on that back end. So it's like you have your guys.
Yeah, you're good, young, solid, puck-moving defensemen. Bring in some role players, shore up the penalty kill a little bit. These guys will both probably be on the penalty kill. I think, to me, this kind of solidifies that Winnipeg is, A, taking a step in the right direction. And, you know, these guys are still young. You could still re-sign both of them. And it fixes some problems. It directly addresses some problems that the team has. And I feel comfortable now saying that, in theory, at least on paper, that Winnipeg is a playoff caliber team.
Well, this is like kind of what we were talking about before with Tampa Bay, right? Like, it's Tampa Bay. It's Tampa Bay trading for a role player on a team that needed role players. Like, they don't, like we were saying earlier, they don't need talent. So it's the same thing for Winnipeg here. You don't need any more high end talent. Like, it would have made no sense for Winnipeg to go out and get Tyler Toffoli because it's like, all right, well, you have your scoring wingers. Why do you need another one? You guys can't defend. Well, I mean, you can't defend adequately, and you have a hole down the middle. So why would you go out and get Tyler Toffoli? But here it's like, okay, they didn't make any splashy trades, any flashy like moves, but like these are just solid hockey trades, and it addresses a need that they had, and they really didn't give up a lot. They gave up the third this year and a fourth next year, which could become a third if Cody Eakin signs in Winnipeg. But still, I mean, that's not like high value for what they got. I mean, they're not paying an arm and a leg to get, you know,
Blake Coleman.
yeah, or something. They're not overpaying for what they got.
Yeah, I think, honestly, these are just good hockey trades. A little weird that Vegas would trade Cody Eakin when they're in the middle of the playoff hunt, but maybe they feel like he's not fitting in right. Or maybe they just feel like that there's another player coming up that the team just needs to shake up. I don't really know. I haven't really been following the Vegas Golden Knights this year as closely, but yeah, I think this is a great trade. Both trades are really good for the Winnipeg Jets, and if they re-sign both players, I mean, now you've just got some role players on a team that, like you said, needs them. I mean, they could still use, in my opinion, another defenseman or two, but
It's a step in the right direction.
yeah, and it shows the roster like, hey, let's get some playoff experience. Let's get some games under Laine's belt. Under, you know, Scheifele, I think, was there for the first playoff run. I think Laine was too, but you know, let's get some games under, you know, Ehlers and Pionk and Morrissey, and you know, and I also think that this gives Connor Hellebuck a little bit of breathing room. I mean, you can probably not worry about so many shots a night when you have a legitimate, solid center to play defense and a good penalty killer, and a defenseman who's gonna block a lot of shots for you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why. And who knows where Winnipeg is next season? They might take another step. I mean, they might have Sami Niku might take a big step for them, and then there was the one other kid that was playing that they sent down that I really didn't understand. Another Finnish kid, but whatever. Anyway.
Oh, not Uolivi. He's on Vancouver. I know who you're talking about though.
Yeah, he started the season with them, and then they sent him down.
Yeah, I forget. It's not Uolivi. His name is the only one that's popping into my head right now.
But it's like, so those guys can come in and take a step, and then now you're cooking. Now you're cooking with fire. Like, that's gonna be a good team, at least on paper. So I mean, yeah, these are just good trades.
And then the next trade, we have the next three trades involve, again, more defensemen. To the Washington Capitals goes Brendan Dillon, who's on a 1-year, $3.27 million contract. San Jose retained 50% of his salary, so he's worth roughly $1.6 million to the Capitals this year on their cap hit. And to San Jose goes a 2020 second-round pick by way of Colorado and a 2021 third-round pick, with the stipulation that if Washington wins the Stanley Cup, this pick becomes a 2023, and this is Arizona's pick. So basically, it could be Brendan Dillon for a second and a third, or Brendan Dillon a second and a third for this year, or Brendan Dillon for a second this year and a third next year.
Right.
You know, I'm not in love with this trade because, to me, and we're going to talk about it when we talk about the teams that should have been trading. I really thought that the Capitals were cooking, and that really they should have just kind of took the team that they had. I think that they were just on a good roll, and everyone was understanding. But I can understand why they make this trade, because there are some pieces on that team that you look at them, like, you know, Brent Siegenthaler could probably get bumped down.
Yeah.
You know, Brendan Dillon is a little bit more steady in his own end than some of the guys that they're playing on the back end now. To me, this was just a weird trade because I thought that the Capitals had been playing pretty well. Obviously they've been struggling as of late.
Took a real nosedive.
But I also think that, not that this is his fault, but I think them trying to feed Ovechkin to get his 700s, which he did get his 700s, by the way. So we want to extend our congratulations to Alex Ovechkin for getting his 700s goal, which we can touch on that towards the end. But
yeah,
I don't know. To me, it was just weird. It almost seemed like a trade to make a trade, but I think that's mostly just because I've started to accept that this roster is a really good roster, and I didn't think they really needed to trade for anything. I mean, look, could you do with maybe upgrading a Michael Kempny or a Siegenthaler? Sure. And I think this is Washington's indication, like, we're going to go for the Stanley Cup this year, no matter what.
Yeah.
But I thought the roster was good enough to do it before, and I don't know. Obviously, you can't really argue with getting a guy like Brendan Dillon.
He's good. You know what you're getting.
But this trade, to me, I thought that Washington might have wanted to just ride out what they had and see if they get this roster, back to the Stanley Cup Finals, which they probably could have.
Yeah, I mean, I think what a lot of teams saw last year was Tampa Bay stand pat at the deadline with what they had and have that enormous collapse in the first round. But again, the issue there is, like, we're talking about apples and oranges here. Like, no one's going to mistake the 2019-2020 Washington Capitals for the 2018-2019 Tampa Bay Lightning.
Nope.
They're a good team. They're a solid team, Stanley Cup contender, but they are nowhere near of the caliber of that team. So the difference is, like, Washington has its role players and its, depth players and its superstars, and they all know their roles, and they're all bought in, and they're all playing well. So for them to go and add something, like you said, just for the sake of seeming like they're just adding something, really didn't make a lot of sense to me. And not because it's Dylan's fault, but like subsequently thereafter, they've been struggling very heavily as of recently.
It's just weird to me that, like, a team that has been through as much as this core roster has been through, obviously Dylan's not bumping anybody out of the caliber of, a John Carlson or a maybe or Dmitry Orlov. Like, those guys are locked into their roles. But I don't know. I felt like the 50-something games up to that point had already proven that they were Stanley Cup contenders. And sometimes adding a piece can hurt your team. I mean, we saw it last year with the Columbus Blue Jackets, who added a bunch of pieces at the deadline, and then shortly thereafter were barely even a playoff team. Whereas before then, I mean, they weren't in a divisional spot, but they looked like we're going to lock ourselves into this wild card. And then after that, they were like, scraping by. I mean, granted, they got in and got
hot.
Swept the Tampa Bay Lightning. But to me, if I was a Capitals fan, I would have been totally okay with standing at the trade deadline, giving the group time to gel because they've been playing together all year and then see what happens. But Brendan Dillon's not really going to shake up the mojo that much. He's a good player. He's an upgrade over some of the guys they have. But then the question becomes, now what do you do with these guys? Do you just sit with them in the press box or... Yeah, I don't know. It just, to me, this is kind of a meh trade. I mean, it's great for San Jose. I think San Jose finally is ready to admit that they're willing to shut this down at this point and start the rebuild. But
you can hold.
I was less enthused with this trade than I should have been.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really. I wasn't too hot on it either. I mean, it happened. It came together very fast, honestly. Like, it came together within like a day. So I was very surprised it got done at all, but I'm not exactly like hot on this one either.
Yeah, and then the next trade, again involving defenseman, St. Louis Blues acquire Marco Scandella from the Montreal Canadiens for a 2020 second and a 2021 fourth. Scandella is a rental. He's 1 year, $4 million at 29 years old. Pause for a second for everybody to laugh at the Buffalo Sabres, who traded who got a fourth back for Marco Scandella, and Montreal flips him for a second and a fourth. I won't pick on the Buffalo Sabres too much. They've been through enough. But again, to me, this again seems like a trade where do the Blues really need Marco Scandella? I mean...
He's a good number 7, I guess, for them. But, like, did you really need to trade for a number 7?
The Blues have been clicking the whole season. They came out of the gate on fire.
And
they look like the Stanley Cup champions they were last year, and
I mean,
Did you really need to pay a second-round pick and a fourth-round pick for a guy who's maybe going to play 14 minutes a night?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that was a really interesting trade. I really didn't. I thought that the St. Louis Blues were one of those teams, like you said, that really didn't need anything when it came to the trade deadline. I mean, it's always nice to pick up a couple of depth pieces here and there, which would have made sense if they traded for a guy that was like a legitimate, just like number 7, and they would have given up like a 4th-round pick for it. And you're like, okay, well, they're putting him there so they have the insurance in case someone goes down with an injury, like with Ryan Dunn last year. When Ryan Dunn went down with that injury, they needed somebody to play in his spot, which is fine. But it's like Marco Scandella can play. Like, he can play in your top 4 and be serviceable. So I don't understand why you would trade for a guy like that unless you're gonna play him. But then it's like, who does he knock out of that top 4? Where it's Parayko, Bouwmeester, Pietrangelo.
He's not playing this year.
Oh, that's right. Bouwmeester's out, right? So it probably doesn't knock Bouwmeester. He probably can play in Bouwmeester's spot, which might have been another issue that they were talking about. Like, they might have thought that, you know, with Bouwmeester out, they needed to add some depth. But I mean, I still don't really understand. Oops, sorry.
I just don't. You know, it's the same with the Washington Capitals trade, where it's like your team's been clicking all year. You know, obviously there's something to be said for always improving, always striving to win that Stanley Cup, but sometimes when a team's good,
Yeah, there's no reason to force it.
When they've been a Stanley Cup contender this whole year, it's not like, oh, they're a mid-tier team that needs that one extra piece. They're not like the 1978, 79 Islanders, who it's like, they're good, but they just need that one piece, and then in comes Butch Goring and we win 4 Stanley Cups. The Blues were a Stanley Cup contender this whole time, and they look great, especially in a very competitive Central. So I understand why they did it, but it's kind of, again, seems like is this trade really going to impact the team that much? Probably not.
No. They're probably going to keep on rolling.
The next trade we have here is Alec Martinez, who's got 2 years at $4 million, 32 years old, so not a rental, goes to the Vegas Golden Knights from the LA Kings for a 2020 second and a 2021 second that used to belong to St. Louis. I don't really know what to make of this trade because it's just so hard to keep up with the Vegas Golden Knights roster these days because they're turning over all these positions constantly.
Yeah, I mean, in Vegas, I don't know what Vegas thinks they are, but like from the outside at least, they don't look like what they're trying to be. Like, they don't look like the Stanley Cup. They don't look like the team that went to the Stanley Cup final in their first season. Nope. They look wildly inconsistent. They're getting subpar goaltending for the most part. But like, adding Alec Martinez at 32 years old is really interesting, I guess, because like, I don't know. I think it's Vegas trying to go for it in a wide open division, but I still think like there are better teams in that division. So I don't really know what they think their path to a Stanley Cup is, especially because I don't think they match up well against any Central Division team.
Well, that's the thing. Each team's, our definition for a team's success is going to be different from team to team. So for this year, sure, you add Tyler Toffoli to a Vancouver Canucks team. Does it make them a Stanley Cup contender? Probably not. But my definition of a successful season for the Vancouver Canucks is making the playoffs, having a competitive first round, and maybe winning a round or two. That's a successful season for the Vancouver Canucks. That's why they added Tyler Toffoli. You know, the Winnipeg Jets adding Cody Eakin and Dylan DeMello. What's a successful season for them? Proving everybody wrong, making the Stanley Cup playoffs. Is a successful season for the Vegas Golden Knights making it to the Western Conference Finals and getting smashed by a St. Louis, a Colorado, or a Dallas Stars? Probably not. Not with all the older pieces that are on this team.
They're want to win a Stanley Cup, yeah.
And does this make them a Stanley Cup contender in my eyes? No. Now, again, we're talking about all these trades before the deadline's over, so they could conceivably pick up another piece and make a serious run at it. But I'm also kind of disenfranchised with the Vegas Golden Knights after the whole Gerard Gallant firing, because it seems to me that this is a very knee-jerk organization. They're not very patient. They turn over their position at forward defense constantly. The only constant on this team has been good in goaltending. And to have a new coach the year after you go to the 2 years removed from a Stanley Cup Finals run, and a collapse / getting screwed by the referees last year. It seems like to me like the Vegas Golden Knights just are not patient enough to build a team, and that this is a perfect move for them to just be like, oh, we're gonna go for it. Oh, I get Alec Martinez.
And I mean, it seems like every year lately, every time a name comes on the market, that's a semi-big name. I mean, like Alec Martinez is a kind of sort of like, it's not a household name, but like if you know hockey, like you know who he is. And like every time that happens, they're in on it. Like Mark Stone and now Alec Martinez, and before that it was Max Pacioretty, and it's like they just keep grabbing these like random guys, and I think you're starting to see the crack in the armor is that there's no cohesive identity. Like, yeah, you can grab a bunch of guys who may or may not have been, you know, the best player on their team and throw them on one team, but like it's not basketball where you can make a super team like that.
Yeah, well, and the other thing is they didn't give it any time to really build an identity, because when the team came into the league, I think one of the big reasons why they made the Stanley Cup Finals was because Gerard Gallant did a wonderful job of just playing simple, easy hockey. And that could have been their identity. You take take teams' pieces that they don't want, be a reclamation project, but mold them to be Vegas Golden Knights hockey players. Simple, fast, effective hockey. But then you fire the coach. Coach is gone. I don't know what Peter DeBoer's bringing to this team. I don't know what Alec Martinez is bringing to this team. I don't know who's on the roster half the time. And I follow hockey religiously, and it's very difficult for me to keep up with this team because just of how often they're turning over this roster. And it just seems to me like you're just taking these players, putting them through the grinder, and then if they don't work out, we'll go get somebody else.
Pretty much. It's essentially like they're always looking for next year's model. They're always looking for the next best thing to come on the market, and it's kind of not a great way to build a hockey team, especially when you trade away Eric Brandstrom. Like, remember we were looking at Vegas, like, oh, they might be okay for the first couple of seasons, but they have a lot of really young players that we're excited about, like
Brandstrom and
Cody Glass and players like that, and then all of a sudden Brandstrom's gone and Cody Glass is the only thing left from that essentially the original Vegas Golden Knights, and it's like, okay, well, who is this team now?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not thrilled with this trade just because right now I'm not really thrilled with this team. I understand why they did it, because they need to help the goaltenders out. The goaltenders have not been good. So to pick up Alec Martinez makes sense. I just don't know that picking up a man who's 32 with 2 years left on his deal, I don't think it puts him over the edge.
No, I definitely not put them over the edge.
And again, when trade deadline day comes on Monday, we could be looking at this team in a different light if they make a significant move. I'll still be complaining that they keep making too many trades, because there's something to be said for building a team. But at least then we might have a more clear vision. Last big trade we're going to get to before we start talking a little bit more about prospective stuff and like what could happen is the Boston Bruins acquire Andre Kasha from the Anaheim Ducks. Kasha has 2 years, $2.6 million at 24 years old. The Ducks take on David Backes, who's probably not going to play hockey for them, I don't think. And if he does, who cares? It's honestly, David Backes.
Yeah.
2 years at $6 million. The Bruins actually retained 25% of his salary. Defenseman Axel Anderson, who's a 2018 second-round pick at 20 years old, and a first-round pick for this year. Again, to me, the Bruins, do they need scoring on the wings? Probably not. I mean, you still have Brad Marchand, who's looking to put up another 100 points. You still have David Pastrnak, who's looking to put up 100 points. Maybe David Krejci hasn't been quite what they wanted. Maybe, some guys haven't taken step forwards. To me, this is a very big question mark trade because I don't know what the Bruins are going to get out of Andre Kasha. And I'm not really willing to make a firm judgment as far as what they're going to get out of him until I see him play. These other players you really kind of know, but I'm not really sure what they're going to get out of Andre Kasha.
I think it's less about what it does for the Bruins and what it says about, where the Bruins were in the market and what pieces they were looking at that they might have been priced out of.
Well, do you think that this is in response to them probably either being told by the Rangers that they're not trading Kreider or being outpriced of the Kreider market?
I think it's one or the other. I mean, it's got to be, right?
Because they were rumored to be in on him.
The Bruins were, wanted him bad. I mean, he's from Boston. The Bruins wanted him bad. But it's looking like, at this point, that they're out. It's looking more and more like the Rangers aren't looking to trade Chris Kreider. which is a whole nother topic we'll cover at some point in this podcast. But it's also, but this looks like specifically in relation to the Bruins that either they got priced out, where it got to the point where the Rangers were saying, well, this is what we want, this is what we're willing to take, and the Bruins couldn't give it to them. Or it looks like the Bruins were like, well, what about Chris? And the Rangers were like, we just don't want to trade him. So this looks like their backup plan was, okay, well, Andre Kasha's big, he can skate, and he's kind of okay, so we'll take him and throw him in our top 6 and see what happens.
I think this is a wonderful trade for Anaheim specifically. I mean, you get a 20-year-old kid who's a second-round pick, and you get a first round for this year. Granted, it's the Bruins, so it's probably going to end up being in the 20 to 20. I see the Bruins probably being a third-round Eastern Conference Final or Stanley Cup Final team, so it's probably going to be in the 26 to 31 range.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you're starting to rebuild in Anaheim, which it looks like they're finally ready to start the rebuild, because why else would you trade a guy who's signed for next year, who's only 24, and if you're not going to hit the nuclear option, right now?
Yeah.
I think that this is really Anaheim's signal, like, we're just going to get rid of everybody and just do the Detroit and just start picking up 19 and 18-year-olds.
Yeah.
I think this is wonderful value for Andre Kasha to get back a 20-year-old kid in a first-round pick.
Yeah. I mean, they weaponized their cap space. I mean, they took on David Backes, which they probably didn't want to, but you do what you got to do to start building, and that's what that's when you have the cap space is what you're supposed to use it for, is to eat these bad contracts in order to force teams to give you what you want, because they're kind of handcuffed. They have to play your game. So, I think Anaheim did a really good job, kind of coercing the Bruins, being like, okay, yeah, we'll take on David Backes, but you have to give us this, and that's kind of it. And the Bruins can't say no, because the Bruins want to get rid of the Backes contract, and they want Andre Kasha.
They need that $4.5 million.
So it's it just ended up being a good trade. Honestly, it was just a good trade for both teams, I think. But I really think Anaheim, this is a good sign for Anaheim, because like you said, this is them really looking to go tear it down and just start over.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that brings us to the end of the trades that were made. So let's start talking just interesting teams and interesting ideas that have been floated around. One thing I wanted to talk to you about is let's get to Chris Kreider, the number one guy on TSN's trade bait right now. The Rangers have played themselves into a very interesting position. Currently, as we speak, it's about 7:44. The Rangers are currently
tied
playing
with San Jose at the Garden, and I think Chris Kreider's playing.
So the Rangers right now are playing, like you said, the San Jose Sharks. As it stands right about now, the New York Rangers are 5 points out of a playoff spot with 2 games in hand. If they win tonight, they'll have 71 points, or they'll have 70 points, and they'll be 3 points out of a playoff spot with 1 game in hand.
So one of the important things about the Rangers at San Jose tonight, outside of the game matters for the Rangers, not so much for San Jose, Chris Kreider is in the lineup. The Rangers didn't bubble wrap him.
At a time when a lot of teams whose guys are moving, like we saw Vlad Nemestikov wasn't playing for the Ottawa Senators.
Yeah, Blake Coleman was taken out of the lineup for the Devils before they traded him.
Right, so guys are getting taken. This is getting taken out of the lineup season. If the Rangers win tonight, they are 3 points out of a playoff spot with a game in hand. They have played themselves into a very interesting position with Chris Kreider, and I know that we somewhat disagree on what the Rangers should do. So let me just put it to you this way. What do you think the Rangers should do about Chris Kreider? In an ideal world. In an ideal world, I think they have to keep him. I know the risk of losing him to nothing is there, but I really think at this point it's looking more like the Rangers need him, because in the last 30 games he's scored 32 points in his last 30 games, and most of them, and he's got 23 goals in the year now, and he's making himself look honestly one of the best power forward in the league. He's using his size, he's using his speed, and he's using his hands in front of the net, and he's scoring, and that's driving his value through the roof. It honestly might never be higher. The value for Chris Kreider might never get higher than it is right now, but he means more to the Rangers than whatever we get back for him, because
we can't replace him in that lineup. You can't replace his combination of skill, size, and speed. I mean, yeah, could you trade for a guy like maybe like Josh Anderson out of Columbus and get a guy like that in return who's a similar kind of player, plays that like power forward kind of grindy kind of game, but doesn't have nearly the finishing ability of Chris Kreider. But I mean, when it's all said and done, like you just can't replace Chris Kreider in the Ranger lineup.
Would your answer change if the Rangers were not as close to the playoffs as they are right now? Say they're 10, 15 points out of the playoffs.
Yeah, then I think it's a little different. Then I think it's all right, maybe we should trade him. And if he wasn't playing as well, then it's like, all right, maybe we should get rid of him. Which, I mean, obviously, like, if he's not playing well, you're not going to trade him. He's not going to have the value. But when he's as integral to that offense as he's been recently, I mean, him and Mika Zibanejad have been on fire together. It really makes it hard especially now that if the Rangers win tonight, they'll only be 3 points out of a playoff spot. When in December we weren't even talking playoffs, they were like 10 points out, and now here they are knocking on the door. Kind of where we thought they'd be, honestly. We thought they'd be a little better the rest of the season. We thought they'd be playing these meaningful games a little bit more, but whatever. It makes it hard to justify to your fan base trading somebody like that right now.
Yeah,
it also makes it hard in the locker room. Because how do you justify that? Because the team looks at it like, we're 3 points out. We're in this. Like, we're in this dog race. Like, we're in the dog fight. Like, we're here.
It's interesting because teams have kind of thrown in the towel being as close. I mean, you know, we saw, I think Minnesota was in a playoff spot or 2 points out when they traded Jason Zucker. And I know that you and I have different opinions on this. Like, my opinion is I think the Rangers should trade Chris Kreider only because, like you said, I don't think his value is ever going to be higher. And at this point, obviously, I think at this point we can both say that the rebuild is basically over. I mean, next year this team should be in the playoffs. There's not a doubt. If Artemi Panarin can even put up 80 points next year, this team should be a playoff team.
Right.
I'm just worried about, you know, you at this point where the rebuild is entering its final stages, you don't want to have a setback like losing a 30-goal scorer, 60-point guy for nothing. But the good thing is, Chris Kreider has given no indication that he wants to go anywhere else.
No.
So that's an extremely good positive for the New York Rangers. He seems like he wants to be here.
And the Rangers, the general manager, Jeff Gorton, and his agent have opened, talks. They're actually, communicating about this. So it's looking, like you said, it looks like Chris Kreider wants to stay a Ranger. And it looks like the Rangers want to keep Chris Kreider in blue as long as they can. So, I mean, I just don't think any return we'd get would be worth it in the next 2 to 3 could replace what he gives us now unless we wait 1 or 2 years. It's not going to be the replacement this year or next year for Chris Kreider, whatever we get. And that's kind of the issue.
Yeah. So the only interesting thing about the Rangers is they have a pretty decent number of contracts coming up this year. This is all off of cap friendly. They're projected to have about $15.5 million in the offseason. They need to sign
Jesper Fast.
They need to sign obviously Chris Kreider, Ryan Strome, Jesper Fast, Brendan Lemieux is coming off his rookie deal.
Tony DeAngelo, and Alexander Georgiev. So I could understand from the Rangers' point of view of saying, what do you think would be fair value for Chris Kreider at this point? He's coming off a $4 million deal. Mika Zibanejad's on a very team-friendly $5.3 million deal. Do you think Chris Kreider settles somewhere in the $6 to $7 million range? Yeah, I think it's probably going to be somewhere between 6 and 7. I don't know if it's going to get upwards of 7.5. I mean,
it also depends on. I mean, if he finishes the season with 35 goals, he might ask for $7.5 million.
Yeah, and it's also comparables the players he's comparable to, and it's hard to find comparables for Chris Kreider because it's who else, what contracts he's going to compare to. I mean, he's a goal scorer, but he's not David Pastrnak.
But I think they're still kind of in a good spot. I mean, obviously you don't want to lose Brendan Lemieux, and he's probably only going to ask for, at this point, playing in second, third line. You might get him for $2-3 million on a bridge deal. I
think the biggest move the Rangers can make this offseason, and it's been talked about a lot online, is if they bought out Henrik Lundqvist of his last year of his contract, it would free up $4.5 million, which would make this significantly easier.
Yeah,
but then we have to carry the $1.5 million in dead space next year, and then I think it's like $2 million in dead space the following season, or however the fuck it works.
Yeah, it's just tough because the Rangers have a couple of buyouts still on the books.
I mean, yeah,
they're still paying Dan Girardi, Ryan Spooner, and Kevin Shattenkirk, but
do we buy out Ryan Spooner?
Yeah, you're paying $300,000 this year and next year.
I forgot about him.
But here's the thing, right? So the problem is the real wild card is really Georgiev. If you keep him, what's he gonna ask for? Because he's probably gonna be starting close to 40 to 50 games next year. Can you give him a bridge deal and maybe get him for that? Give him a bridge deal and maybe get him for like $4 million? I think so, but then that's all your Lundqvist money.
I think you might get him for less than that, honestly. You might get him for like 2.5, maybe 3. Just because, like,
I think if Lundqvist is bought out, I think his camp will probably ask for more. If Lundqvist is still on the books, then yeah, I could understand him taking like $2 million. But I think if he's bought out, they're probably going to ask for close. I'll come down. I don't think 4 or 5, maybe 3.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it. It's a real wild spot for the Rangers to be in. I mean, Tony DeAngelo's all but played himself out of New York.
Well, I was gonna say, what do you think Tony DeAngelo's gonna get? Because he's an RFA, so you still have those rights.
I mean, he's played himself into the position to ask for like $4.5, $5 million. I mean, especially when like Brady Shea is getting paid like
5.25.
Yeah, and Tony DeAngelo's proving to be a better player than Brady Shea is on the ice every night. So he's played himself into a position where I don't know.
It's a very sticky situation, for sure. But that would be my biggest argument for trading Chris Kreider is if he stays, you're gonna lose somebody that you don't. Do I think the Rangers could afford to lose Ryan Strome? Sure. I mean, he's a great player for you guys, but do I think his numbers are inflated from having played with Artemi Panarin? Absolutely.
I mean, and who knows? Hedl might be ready to take that step next year and play in that spot.
Exactly.
Because he's looking like he is. And then you have Brett Howden to step into the third line. So it's like
you don't really need Ryan Strome. He can walk.
Jesper Fast is a guy you probably would like to keep and probably should keep. And he's probably not going to ask for much. So that's a guy like that's not a big deal.
You want to keep Brendan Lemieux just because you always want those kind of grit sandpaper guys. And he's like a perfect player for this team who looks like they're building a very speedy but a very speedy, talented top 6. Have a guy like that on the third line. Grit sandpaper, puck battles in the corner type guy.
He's a gamer. He'll go out there. He'll protect his teammates. It's important. Like you said, it's important to have guys like that. But the biggest thing is I don't want to see the Rangers get rid of Tony DeAngelo. I really don't. But, like, he's played himself out of New York almost.
Would you trade Chris Kreider to keep Tony DeAngelo?
No. But I would trade Tony DeAngelo to keep Chris Kreider.
Okay.
Because Chris Kreider's proved himself to be more like invaluable, especially with the way the Rangers' defensive pipeline is shaping up with Niels Lundqvist and Keandre Miller still back there, and some of the guys playing in Hartford that look like they're ready. Yegor Rykov has been talked about a lot before he went down with that ankle injury at the beginning of the preseason, and even the guy that was playing this year, Libor Hayek, before he got hurt, was playing okay, and he looked like he might be ready to take a step. So. It's not like we're hurting for defensemen, but Tony DeAngelo just brings such a dynamic, presence to that back end to play alongside of a guy like not with Adam Fox, but like play in the line of in the same lineup as Adam Fox. So now it gives the Rangers a 1-2 punch where it's like both these guys can push the play and really, really, bring it.
Do you think that the Rangers management perception of Vitaly Kravtsov being ready or not has any impact on whether or not they keep Chris Kreider?
No, but I think it has an impact on whether they keep Jesper Fast or not, because that's more of an analogous role to him, whereas he can become ancillary. They can trade him or get rid of Jesper Fast and slot Vitaly Kravtsov into that number 2-3 hole that he's been playing in, and management seems to be kind of high on that Gauthier kid that the Rangers have been playing, and I'm not saying it to be negative. I think Julian Gauthier has been good. He's been good for the Rangers. He brings a lot of size. He's 6'4", 225 pounds or whatever. Has got decent hands, so not a bad thing to have in the lineup. And then the other thing is Phil DiGiuseppe's been playing well, so he's played himself into a roster spot. And we still have Brendan Smith under contract, who's been playing forward. So Jesper Foss kind of makes himself almost, because he's not a goal scorer and he's more of a defensive forward, he makes it easier to get rid of because you can replace a guy like that. Whereas Vitaly Kravtsov, you can't replace high-end talent like that.
So if Kreider were to be traded, what would you be looking for in return? Because you're not going to replace everything that he brings to the team, because he's like a unicorn. You know, his size, his speed, his willingness to mix it up. I mean, he's got a reputation for towing the line every once in a while.
Yeah.
He's a unique player. He's a unicorn in the NHL. He's basically a faster version of Brad Marchand with less points.
Yeah, and not as big of a douchebag, to be honest. But yeah.
But you're not going to replace him.
No.
But in your mind, the picture you have for this New York Rangers roster,
so what am
for
I
the
looking
next
for
5 years,
to put in our top 6 to replace him?
What would you want in return? Not even just like a 1-for-1, but like if you could get a couple of pieces back, like what would you be
what
looking
would
for?
the ideal trade look like? Well, I mean, I don't think it'd be off the table to ask for, maybe not a blue chipper. I mean, you're not going to get like, a blue chip prospect out of this. Actually, I don't know.
I think at this point, given the way he's been playing lately,
you might.
You probably get a second or third rated, like a second or third on the pipeline prospect. That guy's like right there.
Because let's be honest, Mark Stone got Eric Brandstrom out of Vegas, and he was on an expiring contract. So, and Chris Kreider is honestly, his value might be higher now than Mark Stone's value was perceived to be at that point in the season.
I think so.
So, ideally, you're looking for a blue chipper, right? If not, a young roster player who's playing. Like,
you're looking for forwards, defense.
Yeah, like probably a forward, because you're probably looking for a guy to replace a forward to replace him in the lineup. A young forward though, so maybe a guy like, even though you wouldn't get him, but a guy like Andre Burakovsky or Jacob Verana, a guy like that. You know what I mean? Young, a lot of talent, some size. Maybe not as big or as strong as Chris Kreider, but he's got maybe a little bit more of a scoring, like a more consistent scoring touch. He's a different kind of player. He's going to be a shooting scorer as opposed to Chris Kreider, who just takes it to the net and scores because he's bigger and stronger than you. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, a first-round pick's not off the table, and maybe a couple other picks aren't off the table. I mean, it really depends on what team and where he goes, because there's a lot of things you can ask for from different teams.
So you'd still be looking for a guy in his vein, like maybe more of an offensive player, but you're still looking for somebody that can bring that extra element of like maybe a little bit of size and speed.
Maybe. I mean, yeah, because you're not going to get the size and the speed together, and you're definitely not going to get the size, the speed, and the scoring the way you get it out of Chris Kreider. So you kind of have to pick one. So if you're looking for size and scoring, there might be a way. I mean,
well, if you take a look at the roster. Projecting the roster, right? You have Mika Zibanejad in the first hole, Philip Hedl in center number 2. 2 good centers. Mika Zibanejad, a speedy shooter.
Right.
Philip Hedl's more maybe like a well-rounded two-way, he's both sides of the puck kind of guy. Artemi Panarin's here. We know we're getting out of Panarin. Flash, fancy. Vitaly Kravtsov, I'm sure you can explain, is a fancy, goal-scoring type player. Pavel Buchnevich probably fits into that top 6.
Yeah, he's probably still gonna ride shotgun with he'll probably ride either shotgun with Hedl or Zibanejad, because depending on whether or not Ryan Strome stays depends on whether or not you stick Zibanejad with Panarin.
And Buchnevich, at least from what I've seen, is kind of more of a not a garbage man, but
he's a playmaker more. He likes to pass the puck more than shoot it, but when he does score, it is kind of greasy. He scores from the front of the net.
But yeah, so to your point, really the only thing that's missing out of that is a power forward.
Right. So I mean, that's what I was saying before with a guy like Josh Anderson, right? He's hit the 30-goal mark before, but he's a pretty consistent 20-goal scorer. He brings that element of size and physicality, but he can play.
Do you think Brendan Lemieux would ever play in the top 6 for the New York Rangers?
He could, but it's not where you want him. I mean, it's not where he was projected to ever end up in his draft year. I mean, he got drafted 31st overall back when there were only 30 teams in the league from... Pretty sure Buffalo drafted him, and then they traded him to Winnipeg in some convoluted trade for defensemen, and then I think it was part of the Tyler Myers trade, honestly. And then, now he's here in New York, but you could play him there, but he doesn't play. He's not a power forward. Brendan Lemieux's more of a grindy kind of stick his nose in and try to get you off your game kind of player. Which is, again, absolutely nothing wrong with that. You need guys like that in the lineup. There's a reason Brad Marchand's successful in the NHL. It's because he's that kind of guy, and it's also because he's really goddamn good at hockey. Like, there's no two ways about that. But it's also like there's no reason to stick him there just because you can. Like, you want to play him where he's going to be the most effective. And so you see what I'm saying about Chris Kreider leaving a big hole there? I mean, even Jesper Foss leaves kind of a hole in the lineup, but you kind of just replace him with Vitaly Kravtsov. So you'd have Buchnevich, Zibanejad, Kravtsov, Panarin, and Hedl, and then you'd have somebody like Josh Anderson or Chris Kreider playing there. And honestly, with Chris Kreider in that top six, that sounds like a really formidable top six. Like, that's not something I would laugh at.
No. I think really the only losing scenario in this for the New York Rangers would be to keep him, and if he walks in free agency because of the money situation that the Rangers have put themselves in.
Not to sound like a jerk, but like it's essentially the John Tavares thing.
Right, like the only losing scenario for the New York Islanders was for him to leave, and he left. And the thing is, because like I said, the rebuild is in that final stage where you just want to put them over the edge. To have to all of a sudden replace him without the value and be able to trade him kind of sucks. But
yeah,
I mean, if they keep him, that's a win in my book. If they trade him, that's a win in my book. It's just you don't want to lose him. But honestly, with the narrative that's coming out of New York, it really sounds like he wants to stay.
And it sounds like the team really wants to keep him if they can.
It's just now you have to work out the money, but you'll make the money for a guy like Chris Kreider.
Yeah, and I mean, you could trade. I mean, you could hang on to Ryan Strome and take that contract to the draft because it's an RFA contract, so you have the rights. So if you trade him, whatever team gets him still has negotiating rights. So that's a contract I would see the Rangers and D'Angelo both getting traded at the draft where their value is higher, because trading guys like that now really doesn't get you anywhere because they're looking at them as rentals. But at the draft, every team thinks they're in the playoffs. Every team thinks they have not every team, but most teams think they have a chance to improve their team one way or another at the draft. And by acquiring players like that, they probably feel like they could do it, and you'd get real fair value out of that, not, trade deadline value, which is either hyperinflated or really low, because teams are either if it's a buyer's market, the value's low, it's not going anywhere. But if it's a seller's market like it's been this year, those prices are going to be so inflated. Yeah,
well, it's going to be really interesting come Monday when I think we've seen more or less most of the defensemen move. I mean, there have been talks about Toronto's Tyson Barrie getting traded, but I think we've seen the biggest rush of defensemen get traded. I think now we're just kind of waiting on the forwards. So yeah, you're going to see that value kind of go all over the place, especially with, kind of to transition to what teams should be doing what. The narrative out of Colorado lately has been, well, Mikko Rantanen's done for a long time. Again, the guy can't catch a break. Now with teams like heavyweights involved in the forward market, like the Colorado Avalanche, in theory the New York Islanders, in theory maybe the Arizona Coyotes add another scoring winger. These heavyweights that are getting, well, not heavyweights, but in terms of teams that have a lot to give up. I think you're going to see the prices spike. What team are you most interested to watch at the trade deadline?
Honestly, I know we talk about them a lot, but probably the Toronto Maple Leafs. I want to see what Toronto does, because there's a lot of issues on that line in that roster that they need to fix, and I want to see if they attempt to fix any of them at the deadline. I mean, they already got their backup goaltender, right? That was an issue they needed to fix, but they still don't have Morgan Riley, and he's still out for a long time, and they've struggled without him. I mean, they have looked flat out bad. There's some nights where I think they forget how to defend, and without Morgan Riley, that's a bad sign. So, I mean, Toronto would be interesting to see what they do. And they have guys like Kapanen that they could trade. I mean, William Nylander's name has been thrown out as trade bait for the last, 2-3 seasons now?
Yeah. Do you think that it's... Because when I was writing up what I think teams should be doing, I put the Toronto Maple Leafs as buyers, and I said their biggest need is grit and defense, and that it's a very high urgency need.
Yeah.
And I said their surplus is scoring wingers, which I have a ton of. Do you think we could see William Nylander being traded out of Toronto this year for a couple of pieces, maybe some gritty guys, some depth defensemen, something like that?
I think you'd probably see him get traded for it'd probably be more closer to a 1-for-1 or a 1 and a couple of pieces. They're not going to trade him for a bunch of depth pieces. They're going to look to get something that they deem like fair value out of him. So I'd imagine you see him get traded for like a real defenseman, right? Like, just not like Alex Pietrangelo, but someone of that caliber, somebody good, like
Ben
somebody.
Sherratt?
See, now that's interesting because that's Toronto, Montreal, and they don't trade. But that's a good fit. I mean, Ben Sherratt would fix a lot of the issues, and William Nylander would be a really nice fit in Montreal. But you don't want to trade somebody from the blue and white to the I mean, even outside of the division thing, I mean, they just hate each other. So, like, you don't want they're not going to trade with one another. It's just very rare that you see the Toronto Maple Leafs trade with the Montreal Canadiens, even if the fit is perfect. I mean, this goes back, this is kind of like what we were talking about a couple years ago. You know, when we were talking about Ryan McDonough getting traded out of New York, and the perfect trading partner at that time was probably the New York Islanders. They had a bunch of young forwards to give up, and the Rangers were starting their tear down to see if we could get anything out of them, and the Islanders needed defensemen. And it didn't happen, but it's like, because the Rangers aren't going to trade with the Islanders.
Yeah, well, it's funny because people are talking about Chris Kreider being a great fit for the Islanders, but it's like, why would the Rangers, who are on the precipice of being a playoff team, if not this year, then next year, trade to a team that they would probably play in the playoffs?
Play in the playoffs and have to play 4 times a year.
I think, it might be a little bit better this situation just because theoretically Montreal is not
Going to be in the playoffs.
But I think on paper it makes sense, but like you said, I don't know that.
Just
this trade would ever
culturally,
happen,
it's not going to happen. But yeah, I mean, a guy like Ben Sherratt would be a really nice fit. I mean, they could have looked to go for. I mean, they could have went back to the Los Angeles well and tried to have gotten Alec Martinez out of there if they could have, but he's got the extra year, so that would have been a problem.
Carolina. Do you think that they could make a move? Because Carolina has been struggling really poorly. Or they've been struggling a lot as of late. They slipped out of a playoff spot. And do you think that the Carolina Hurricanes could maybe use some help up front? Maybe because I love the Carolina Hurricanes players. I love Svechnikov. I love Sebastian Aho. They just don't have that. They're not a game changer. Like a guy like Artemi Panarin can go up the ice, score a brilliant goal, deke out 3 defenders, and score a goal. And we've seen flashes of that from William Nylander, whereas Sebastian Aho and Andrei Svechnikov are very talented players in the cycle game, when they get into the zone. And that's not to take away from anything. They're both elite players. I love Svechnikov. I love Sebastian Aho. But do you think that Carolina would be willing to part with one of their better defensemen for a little bit of flash, a little bit of pizzazz up front?
I mean, it would seem like a match made in heaven considering that they have the excess, and the only issue with it is that Dougie Hamilton is injured.
Dougie Hamilton is hurt. Exactly.
If Dougie Hamilton wasn't hurt, I don't see why not. I don't see why it wouldn't be Dougie Hamilton, because for some reason he was talked about getting traded this year out of Carolina. Because for some reason, Dougie Hamilton can't seem to stick with the team. And I don't really understand why. He's been great for them, but for some reason there were still rumors that Dougie Hamilton wasn't staying in Carolina. So I really don't know what's going on there. But, yeah, I mean, if you're given the opportunity when you have a surplus like that to add a player like of William Nylander's caliber to your roster, I don't see why you wouldn't take the opportunity.
The funny thing is that these two teams are actually playing each other right now.
So Kyle Dubas is sitting there like,
Just looking at the roster here, you see Aho with 56, Svechnikov 56, Teravainen with 56. But then it starts to fall off. Dougie Hamilton gets 40 from the back end. Slavin's getting 32 from the back end. But then you're getting 32 out of Natchez, 29 out of Dzingel, 27 out of Warren Fogle. Like, they could use some help. They could use some scoring up front. I mean, you're really not getting a lot out of Nino Niederreiter, Eric Haula, Jordan Stahl.
I mean, could you imagine a top 6 of Teravainen, Svechnikov, Aho, and what's it called? So Aho, Teravainen, Svechnikov, William Nylander, and Martin Necas. I mean, that would be. I mean, that in my opinion, that would put the Carolina Hurricanes over the edge, and they'd be a real threat to win a Stanley Cup.
Yeah, William Nylander for Jake Gardiner.
I think Toronto fans would burn down the ACC if that happened, or the Rogers Place, or whatever it's called now, formerly the Air Canada Center.
If they didn't just trade for him, I would say Joel Edmondson, but I don't think they're willing to move Joel Edmondson. I think if Dougie Hamilton's not hurt, I think you could really make an argument for William Nylander for Brett Pesce and some pieces. I don't think that's a 1-for-1.
No, and Brett Pesce's good, and you don't want to have to trade Brett Pesce, but given the opportunity to acquire something like William Nylander, when up front you could use a little bit of help.
Yeah, especially because if Dougie Hamilton's not hurt, you have Joel Edmondson, Jake Gardner, Dougie Hamilton, and Jacob Slavin as your top four. Brett Pesce kind of becomes redundant when you have players in his similar vein like Slavin, Edmondson, and Trevor Van Riemsdyk.
Right.
He kind of becomes redundant, and I think that he would provide some steadiness and depth to the Toronto defense. You don't have to rely on Rasmus Sandin, who's more of a puck-moving type defenseman.
Right.
I think that these two teams could come together and make a trade. And I had the Carolina Hurricanes listed as tweener between should they sell, should they buy.
Yeah.
I think that this would be a good hockey trade for both teams. Carolina needs the scoring. God knows that Toronto doesn't need the scoring. And it's not like William Nylander would leave that much of a hole in your top six because up comes Kasperi Kapanen.
Yeah.
I think that'd be a very interesting trade there. The team that I'm most interested in following is the Colorado Avalanche because I'm very interested to see if they add a scoring, maybe not, a bona fide 30-goal scorer, but somebody to kind of patchwork, put in there while Brandon's hurt.
Done. Yeah.
And we're still not sure about Philip Grubauer. I've been trying to find an update on him, and
the last thing
we heard was that he was on the ice, but then he was taken off the ice, and I'm going to look it up now to see if there's any updates for Philip Grubauer.
Well, it's like Rantanen, honestly. Like, Rantanen is not getting any updates. You're hearing weeks. It's like he's out weeks with an upper body or a lower body injury. So it's like, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, what does that actually mean?
As of 2 days ago, Yahoo Sports said that there's no timetable, but that's Yahoo Sports, so, take that for what it's worth. But Grubauer's out with a lower body injury. Some people are saying that he's going to miss weeks. It seems like the narrative on this changes because a week ago, Grubauer out indefinitely. 6 days ago, Grubauer out day to day. 5 days ago, Grubauer out multiple weeks. So it seems like nobody really knows, and it's weird that they're saying it's a lower body injury because his main point of contact was the head. But maybe when he fell back, he pulled his groin or something like that. But
yeah.
Do you think if Grubauer's out into the playoffs, we see them make a move for a goaltender?
Yeah, and it would be a wild goaltender to make a move for? Braden Holtby.
Ooh. Well, that's interesting because Holtby, as much as we might like to think, well, why would you trade Braden Holtby before the playoffs when you're trying to win the Stanley Cup?
He hasn't been very good.
All year he's not been the Braden Holtby that we thought he should be, and yeah, I could understand why that move would be made. I don't know. I would love to see. It's never going to happen. I would love to see the Carey Price to Colorado move. That would
or the Henrik Lundqvist to Colorado moves people have talked about, and you're like, wait, why?
But right now, Braden Holtby this year, if I pull up his stats here, he's 21, 13, and 5 in 42 games. He has a 3.14 and 8.96. Whereas Ilya Samsonov has played 24 games, 16, 5, and 1, 2.41, and a 9.16.
Samsonov lost today to New Jersey, but it wasn't his fault. They lost
it was 3-2.
3-2.
So
and they got scored on a power play late. So
yeah, I think I would love to see these kind of moves. Now, if Arizona's not in the playoff spot, and if they don't think that they're gonna, or even if they are, do you think that Arizona might be willing to move either an Antti Raanta or a Darcy Kemper when Kemper becomes healthy?
Yeah, we thought that trade was gonna. We thought that one of them was gonna go as part of the Taylor Hall trade back in November, but that never happened. And they have this. They seem to be really content to ride those two goaltenders for whatever reason, splitting time when both of them are kind of proving that they're ready to play in a number one. But I wouldn't Antti Raanta for whatever pieces you can get to Colorado to fill that hole until Philip Grubauer is ready to play isn't necessarily a bad thing, and it also lets you take some of the load off Philip Grubauer.
Darcy Kemper was assigned to their AHL team for conditioning, and NHL.com reports that he could play Tuesday when they play the Florida Panthers. So Kemper's coming back.
So that would open the door for the possibility that you could trade Antti Raanta with the hope that Darcy Kemper is ready to come back and play on Tuesday, because you wouldn't really be playing any games without him.
Yeah, and it's weird because the goaltenders really haven't been talked about in this trade market, but I mean Darcy Kemper / Antti Raanta. There's a possibility that, you know, we could see Robin Leonard be traded. I don't think Chicago should, but his name has been brought up.
I mean, Corey Crawford's name's been brought up too.
Martin Jones, if you want a backup.
And if you're Detroit, you might be able to get away with trading Jimmy Howard.
If I was Detroit right now, I'd be trading Jonathan Bernier, because his value has never been as high outside of when he was traded to Toronto. Since he's been traded to Toronto, his value's never been as high as it is now, because he's putting up very respectable numbers on a very bad team.
Well, see, but if you're Colorado, do you take a chance on Jonathan Bernier?
No, especially because you've had him before and you saw what he got out of him.
Right. So would you be more willing to take a chance on Jimmy Howard? Because you know what he can do in the past?
Yeah, I mean, Howard's been there. That's the thing, is Howard has been in those deep playoff runs with the Red Wings. That's a good question. I almost said Pittsburgh for Matt Murray, but I don't think they're going to trade Matt Murray.
You probably see them trade Casey DeSmith first. And Casey DeSmith has not proven he can play at an NHL level as a number one yet. Whereas Tristan Jarry is looking better and better and better every night. And you're like, oh no, this looks bad for us.
It's interesting because there are some teams that could move. I mean, we could see, if at all possible, we could see Devin Dubnyk out of Minnesota. If not this year, then in the next 2 years, because they've traded Jason Zucker. The news came out today that Mikko Koivu was not waiving his no-trade clause, so he's saying put.
He's going to retire probably at the end of the year. His contract is up, I think.
But if Minnesota's starting to rebuild, could we see a Devin Dubnyk coming out of Minnesota? I mean, it hasn't been talked about at all. This is pure speculation.
I'm trying to think of what other teams are out there. Like
Craig Anderson.
If you're Vancouver and this opportunity presents itself and you can get another piece that you think you might need, would you trade Jacob Markstrom?
Not this year. If this was, like we said, maybe 2 years into a bridge deal and we saw Thatcher Demko's ready to go, yes, but I don't know that I'm willing to be potentially sacrificing the playoffs this year just because you want to give those young guys the confidence. Yeah. But in a couple of years, I think Markstrom's going to be on the market.
I mean, you wouldn't want to. You also, like, just in case, you wouldn't want to be up the creek without a paddle. Like, if Thatcher Demko isn't ready to play.
Buffalo's got two: Carter Hutton and Linus Ullmark.
Yeah, but Carter Hutton's been really bad this year. He's been really, really bad. Linus Ullmark has been okay. He's been pretty good. So, like, Linus Ullmark might be a name you throw out there.
Georgiev. I mean, I don't think he's getting traded at this point from what we've heard. But from a pure speculation standpoint, it kind of makes sense.
I mean, the Devils have Corey Schneider and Mackenzie Blackwood
waived. I mean, it's weird because there's so many goalies on the market, but it doesn't really, or not on the market, but there's a lot of goalies that
could
have
get moved,
played themselves into being expendable, but we're not hearing about it. It's very.
I mean, even Nashville, like UC Saros, is a name that might get thrown out there. I mean, I doubt it because he's like the future in net for them. But like,
if I was St. Louis, I'd consider trading Jake Allen because he's had a great renaissance year for him.
Yeah.
And do you really need a guy like Jake Allen who's proven he can play 50 to 60 games behind a guy like Jordan Binnington who apparently is just never going anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Binnington's got ice in his veins. He's the guy, so. I mean, Jake Allen's a really interesting one just because, like, he's been so wildly inconsistent in his career. And everybody was so high on him when he came up behind, and when they got rid of, was it Halak? And they were running Elliott and Allen for a while, and then Elliott left, and then they had Ryan Miller, and then now Jake Allen was the starter, and then he lost his job to Jordan Binnington, and they won a Stanley Cup. So,
Jake the Snake. But really, all these guys, you know, you really don't need an elite goaltender because they've proven that they have faith in Phil Grubauer, but you would need somebody to play this year. I don't know that you're the Colorado Avalanche, and as good as Pavel Francouz has been for them, I don't know if you want to go into a playoff run where you could win a Stanley Cup with him starting.
Do you go to Columbus maybe and see if you can get Elvis Merzlikins, or if if Eunice Corpusalo ends up being healthy, which there's no indication that he is, we haven't heard anything because he's still on the timetable. But if just say in a perfect world, Eunice Corpusalo is still like healthy, Elvis Merzlikins still goes on that red hot streak, but he doesn't fizzle out as hard as he did. Could you see maybe him end up on the market because Columbus didn't want to ride two goaltenders?
I think if this wasn't his rookie year, maybe. But I think Columbus is probably going to hold on to him just because.
Just in case.
What happens if he blows up and his trade value is 3 or 4 times higher than it is now? Yeah, so I'm really interested to see what the Colorado Avalanche are going to do because I think that this is a really strong year for them. They have a very good chance to win the Stanley Cup, and why wouldn't you try? You know, again, do I think that Philip Grubauer is on the same level as a 2014 Henrik Lundqvist or, you know, even a 2018 Braden Holtby? No. That's the thing that scares me about this Colorado Avalanche team is they're so good in every position, but the goaltending is so young.
I mean, he has all the upside to be a really good
right.
I mean, I don't think he's ever gonna reach the ceiling that was like a 2014 Henrik Lundqvist. But I mean, like, he can probably get to the level of like a 2015 Corey Crawford. Like, there's no reason he couldn't.
And this team looks good enough to support a goaltender like that.
Right, and like, I mean, he's in my opinion, he's going to be at his highest. The highest his ceiling is, at least as I see it, is a very good above average goaltender on an elite team. And
so yeah, like a Corey Crawford.
Yeah, it's like there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
It's just the second Corey Crawford, you start mentioning those guys in conversations with like Henrik Lundqvist and Braden Holtby and Carey Price is when like you're like, wait, no. But yeah.
Do you think? And now we're just kind of like pinballing around here. Do you think Edmonton makes a deal at the deadline?
I don't know, and I really think it's entirely because it has nothing to do with Connor McDavid's injury. It has everything to do with the fact that this is the general manager's first year behind. It was Ken Holland's first year at the helm of this team, and I still think he's still trying to familiarize himself totally with this roster. But Ken Holland's a smart guy. If he feels he's a chance to improve his team, he's gonna pull the trigger. He has no reason not to. I think the biggest handcuff on them, though, are some of these contracts they've handed out. I mean, the Mikko Koskinen contract really, really handcuffs him. It's got 2 years left after this year at $4 million and a full no-move clause. So, I mean, what do you do with that? If you want to upgrade your goaltending, sure, but what are you going to have, a $4 million backup with a no-move clause? I mean, it's like what the Rangers are having to deal with Henrik Lundqvist. It's like we have a $8.5 million third-string goaltender, and he's got a full no-trade clause. So it's like, okay, well, what do we do now?
Yeah, I mean, they've got a lot of things coming up. I mean, luckily for them, there's some contracts that are coming off the books. Like the Sam Gagner contract is coming off. And they really don't have to sign anybody huge. Leon's still under contract. McDavid's still under contract. The Nuge still has 2 years left. Chiasson still got 2 years left. That Zach Kassian contract kicks in next year. His $3.2 million contract. Really. Darnell Nurse signed his Bridger. He's going to be on a $5 million contract.
Right.
You got to sign Ethan Bear, but he's only 22. You could probably convince him to take like $2-3 million.
Yeah, especially because he's only been in the league 1 year.
But yeah, so they don't have a huge amount of pieces to sign, but to me, again, like you said, it kind of comes down to where does Ken Holland think this team is, and is he willing to take that risk in his first year?
The other big question is what's going on with Jesse Puljujarvi. Like, what is the situation with Jesse Puljujarvi? Because there's been no updates, and what is Ken Holland going to just stand his ground and essentially either ice him out of the NHL, or is he going to try and convince him to come back and play? Because again, like I said, like I keep saying, and I've been saying it since October, there is no better spot for him than Edmonton because there is no bigger hole in the lineup at the wing than Edmonton. There just isn't.
Except for maybe New York and the Islanders.
Maybe.
But I do agree with you that that could be interesting. Maybe Ken Holland uses that as leverage. I mean, Puljujarvi's value is nowhere near what it was at the beginning of the year before this whole thing.
Especially because he can't play right now.
But to a team that's not going to be competitive for 4 or 5 years, Maybe you throw in Puljujarvi to kind of sweeten a little deal. Like, you know, maybe you give him to Detroit for a guy like, the guy that used to play in Dallas.
Trevor Daley.
Yeah. Maybe you give him to Detroit, throw a little Jesse Puljujarvi, because Detroit, their projection is they're still going to be bad for the next 3 to 5 years. They can wait. They can wait for that contract to come up, and they can talk to Jesse Puljujarvi.
And I think Puljujarvi just doesn't want to play in Edmonton. Like, I don't think he doesn't want to play in the NHL.
The relationship is just...
It's so toxic at this point. Like,
it's just unsalvageable. So Edmonton's another team I'm looking at. Is there another team that you wanted to kind of discuss?
I'm trying to think. I mean, there are a lot of really interesting things that, like, specific players I'm looking at, but I don't know about teams.
Ottawa Senators, what are you doing with JG? Are you signing him? Are you going to try to sign him? Are you trading him?
I mean, it really depends. Like, does Ottawa feel like they're in a position to be competitive in the next 2 to 3 seasons? Because JG Pajot is 27, right? So if they feel like they can't compete in the next 3 years, so he'll be 30 then. It's hard. I mean, his values are arguably may never get higher, right? It's like the Chris Kreider thing. Like, he's arguably never going to have more value than he has right now. So I don't see why you wouldn't trade him if you're Ottawa and you're still in the phase of your rebuild where you're just trying to stockpile picks and young players. But if you're Ottawa and you feel like you might be in a position to make the playoffs in 2 or 3 years, I don't see why you would trade him. Because he can become a really big contributing piece to that team with guys like Brady Tkachuk and Thomas Chabot.
To me, it all depends on if Ottawa figures out their goaltending or not. Because let's be honest here.
What if Pajot to Arizona for one of the goaltenders? That would solve a lot of issues. You can play Pajot on that wing.
That is very interesting. How old is Antti Raanta?
I think he's like 28. He's probably similar age. He's a little older than Pajot. I think he's like 28 or 29.
Ranta's 30. Darcy Kemper is a little younger, I think. Darcy Kemper is 29. Because let's be honest here, the Ottawa Senators are not a good team, but they're better than we thought they were going to be. And they're beating some pretty good teams this year.
Yeah.
And they have the core. I mean, up front, Brady Tkachuk, Connor Brown,
Drake Batherson,
Balsers, somebody else, Colin White.
Anthony Duclair is turning heads.
He's had a real slump, so his name's kind of fallen off the trade market.
Well, I mean, it's the all-star slump. I mean, he went to the all. It's like home run hitters in baseball. They go to hit the home run derby and they don't hit home runs the rest of the season.
On the back end, Thomas Chabot, Eric Brandstrom. What's it called? There's another guy out there that's still pretty young, but I mean, really, the core is there, minus the goaltender. Do I think that Ottawa will make the playoffs next year? I don't know that Boston's going to fall off hard enough for that to happen. I don't see the Tampa Bay Lightning falling off in the next 3 to 5 years. Their window is probably 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, the Toronto Maple Leafs might, because of all the absolute nuclear chaos that's going to come in this offseason with their contract
situation. Yeah.
When they have 5 of 6 defensemen coming off the roster.
Do I think the Panthers are going to be a much better team next year? Fingers crossed that Bob figures out his garbage year.
So there's been talks about the Panthers maybe trading Vincent Trocheck, and maybe you make a move for Vincent Trocheck and you get them JG Pajot, you sweeten it a little more, and you try to pry Spencer Knight from them.
Yeah, Spencer Knight's really interesting because they pick Spencer Knight at the draft, and then they sign Bob to a 7-year, $10 million deal. So essentially, you just logjam Spencer Knight out of starting job in the NHL because either you're going to have to buy out that contract
or trade him,
or you're going to have to convince somebody to pick him up, which right now nobody in the league's touching that contract for his play just for this year. I think his reputation is enough to carry him right now.
Yeah.
But if he has another year next year like this and another year after year like this, that contract's going to nobody's touching that.
It'll be like Luongo all over again.
And that's not to say I don't think Bob's a great goalie, but right now he's not playing the way he needs to be.
I mean, yeah. Last year he was the best goaltender in the NHL, arguably.
So it kind of forces them into a situation where either you have to convince somebody to take that contract, or you have to buy him out. And Spencer Knight's kind of log jammed out from starting. I think if you can try to convince Florida, like, listen, this kid, as good as he might be, you're locked in.
You want to win a Stanley Cup, and he's not in your window to win a Stanley Cup because you have Bob.
And you're locked into that Bob contract. I'm sorry, but unless he turns his career around, you can't move that contract. If he wins another, like, Vezina-type season, sure, you can move that contract. But then why would you?
Right.
It's like a lose-lose situation. If Bob turns it around and he's the Bob we know, okay, now you can move the contract, but why would you move a Vezina?
Why would you win? Yeah, exactly.
If he stays bad, now you can move the contract. So they really locked themselves in, and yeah, I mean, what are you going to wait until Spencer Knight's 28 to have him start playing in the NHL? So yeah, I think Spencer Knight would be a perfect pickup for the Ottawa Senators. I think that's kind of a match made in heaven, and especially because there have been talks that Mike Hoffman might leave Florida in the offseason and get J.G. Pajot, who's a similar ilk type of player. Yeah, I think that'd be a great trade. J.G. Pajot to Florida for Spencer Knight. You might have to sweeten it a little bit.
Yeah, you're probably going to have to sweeten it, throw in some like guys and some picks maybe, but
I think that's a great trade.
I mean, yeah, it really would solve a lot of the issues. I mean, then it would just be like, now you have the whole core in place, now it's just making sure they develop properly.
Yeah.
and you'd be getting Spencer Knight at 19 or 18 or 19. I think he's probably 19 now after his draft year, to really mold him the way you want him, as opposed to him being, developed by another team and then you have to come get him and try to get him to work with you. It's like, no, you can just turn him into the goaltender you want.
And you have to think this is taking a little bit of a toll on Spencer Knight's, mental game, just being like, sure, he's probably not thinking about the NHL right now, but it's probably in the back of his head, like, what do I do?
Is there any way I even get to the NHL at this point?
And sure, okay, you pick up Spencer Knight. By the time this Ottawa Senators team is starting to be competitive, I think probably by 3 years from now, they should be in a position where the Rangers are right now.
Yeah.
Bubble playoff team starting to take that step. He's still 21, 22. Maybe that's a little young to be starting. But you can always do what Vancouver's doing. Sign a veteran starting goaltender. Let Spencer Knight learn under him and then take over.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And like I said, that's a match made in heaven.
I think Spencer Knight would also be a match made in heaven for, maybe a team like Detroit. But then again, now you're trading in division, and
that's a whole other story. The other thing is, what does Detroit really have to offer them?
Right.
In terms of value for Spencer Knight. Because Detroit's in an interesting situation where, their draft picks are the most valuable things they have, but they need them more than anybody else does. Those draft picks are more valuable to them than any player they'd get from any other team.
Yeah, unfortunately, most of their veterans are kind of not really tradable, like Mike Green or any of those guys at this point.
Athanasiou's name's been thrown out there, so maybe you could swing an Athanasiou for Spencer Knight, but
he's a little bit older. He's 24. Probably wants to start competing in the next 2-3 years, which the Detroit Red Wings aren't going to be. I can understand that. So there's another name I want to talk about as well with this, because he's a similar type player. Ilya Kovalchuk, Montreal Canadiens. I think it's pretty clear at this point that Montreal understands that they're not going to be a playoff team. If you're an NHL GM and you need scoring on the wings, do you take the risk of trading for Ilya Kovalchuk given all the past issues that he's had? Or do you just say, no, I'm okay with this?
There are definitely going to be GMs who are willing to take the risk on Ilya Kovalchuk, especially with 21 points in 36 games. But the thing is, the biggest thing is it's a really low-risk move because his contract expires at the end of this year. So it's really a low-risk investment for them to have to deal with. So say you're a GM and it backfires and he doesn't work out, it's like, all right, well, I paid him $700,000 to essentially not have it work, which is fine. It's not like LA who's paying him $6 million to not have it work. But, it's just, I don't know. Ilya Kovalchuk might just be untradeable because of his name at this point. A lot of guys might take a hard pass on him. Montreal's always been, Mark Bergevin's always been willing to take chances on guys, and that's exactly how Ilya Kovalchuk ended up in Montreal. But I think there are going to be a lot of teams a lot less willing to take chances on guys like this, especially because it might just be a flash in the pan. You might trade for him, and he might not score at all.
Yeah, that's kind of thing. Let's talk. I don't know. Is there another player specific that you wanted to hit on, or another?
I mean, like on the name on the board that you have, I think it's interesting. It's Shane Gostisbehere.
I was just gonna say, because it's weird that we're talking about Shane Gostisbehere being traded, but I mean, because 2 years ago he was like the biggest thing in Philly.
Yeah,
but now he's kind of been overshadowed by.
You don't really hear about him anymore.
Travis Sanheim. The other guy.
Ivan Provorov.
Ivan Provorov. They got Matt Niskanen.
Robert Hagg.
Robert Haig's even overtaken him, and he's kind of struggled this year to put up the points that he was putting up. Do you think we could see Shane Gostisbehere at the ripe age of 26 being moved out of Philadelphia?
Yeah, I could see it, especially because Philly needs some help up front probably with their scoring. And weirdly enough, they've been linked to Jeff Carter, who started his career in Philly. So could you see a Shane Gostisbehere for Jeff Carter kind of thing, which would then knock Kevin Hayes into the role of being a $7.5 million third liner? I mean, maybe. I mean, Jeff Carter would really help that team a lot. I mean, that's 2-time Stanley Cup champion Jeff Carter. Like,
yeah,
40-goal scorer Jeff Carter.
It's just weird that we're talking about him being on a block when 2 years ago it was like he's the next big thing.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, he's kind of fizzled out. Like, he's not the same player he was. I mean, he's only got 12 points in 41 games this year, whereas like a couple years ago he had like 60 points almost.
Yeah, it's real interesting the situation there.
I mean, and with Philly, you have the expendable parts of your roster all come on D.
Yeah, because that defensive core is crazy.
Like, and then you have Matt Niskanen and Justin Braun still playing in it.
And they're young enough that they can play another couple of years too.
Right. So if you want to, then you end up with Cam York coming through the pipeline, and it's like, oh well, they're retiring. Here comes Cam York at 21 years old, ready to play. It's like, all right, boom, there you go.
Yeah, it's real interesting.
Not to cut you off, but Philly, I know we've talked about this a lot, like, just hanging out. Philly has all the potential to be absolutely disgusting on the back end. Between Carter Hart. So you have Ivan Provorov, right? This is totally a tangent, but like whatever, it's a good topic. Ivan Provorov, Travis Sanheim, Robert Haig, you have Cam York in the pipeline, and then they're all playing in front of Carter Hart.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, maybe this is just a fluke year for Gostisbehere if he comes back and he's like the top 2 defenseman that they thought he was going to be. Even if he's not, I mean, that top 4 that you just mentioned, I mean, that's ridiculous, and that's perfect because whenever you would see Philly in the playoffs, what always sunk them was the defense and the goaltending.
I mean, do you remember that one series they played with the Penguins, and it was
like every game was like 8-7, like
they had
6-5.
It was like a 10-6 game at one point, like
just utter ridiculousness.
It was 2012. Let me see if I can find these scores. This was absolute chaos.
But yeah, I think, and what has plagued the Flyers, they've made a genuine reach to try to fix it, which is the back end and the goaltending. I mean, obviously we know what Carter Hart brings to the table, but Justin Braun, he's starting to get up there in age. Like he's 33, so he can probably only play maybe another 2 to 3 years at an elite, at a high level. Matt Niskanen's 33 again. Probably only another 2-3 years at the level that he's playing at now. But I mean, then like you said, Cam York comes in, and then you got Robert Haig, who's only 25. Then you get Ivan Provorov, who's 23. Travis Sanheim's 24. Carter Hart is 22, 21. Like
it's just disgusting. Like
that's gonna be the lockdown team in the future.
So it starts off very normal with a 4-3 overtime game. Then there's a 8-5 game. Then there's an 8-4 game, a 10-3 game, and it comes down a little bit, 3-2, and then a 5-1 game when Philly wins the series. Like, what was that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like the defense and the goaltending is always what sunk the Flyers, and they made a genuine, reach to try to fix that. And they still have the young pieces up front. I mean, hopefully Nolan Patrick can
come back from his concussion issues or his migraine issues.
Can come back from that. But then you still got Travis Konechny, who's still up front.
Travis Konechny's been really good for them this year. You have Joel Farabee, who's also been really good for them this year.
I mean, and then some. I mean, even guys like Claude Giroux, who's 32, right? So he's got maybe 3 or 4 years left at a high level.
But Sean Couturier is only in his late 20s.
Yeah, and Sean Couturier is 27. I don't think JVR is that old. JVR is 30, so he's got another 5-6 years left in the tank. So this team, has the scoring up front. I mean, they're gonna have to replace a guy like Claude Giroux and Jakub Voracek at some point. But I mean, honestly, in terms of projection in the East, 5 years from now, who's going to be the top level teams? It's probably going to be the Rangers and the Flyers, just kicking the crap out of each other. The Rangers are going to be this high flying offensive dynamo versus the Flyers, it's big sturdy back end.
It's going to look like the 1970s all over again. Because remember, we don't remember obviously, but we've read about that Rangers team from the early 70s, from 69 to 1975 was this high flying offensive juggernaut backed by good goaltending, but just an absolute juggernaut up front with the gag line and guys like Steve Vickers and Brad Park on the back end. But they ran into the Flyers, who were big, tough, didn't score a lot, were scary, and Matt, I'm very excited that the prospect of Ranger Flyer rivalry getting reignited like that is very exciting.
I think it's going to, because these teams are on projection. I mean, the Flyers, let's be honest here, as of this moment, they're a better team, but only slightly. They're in that third Metro / wild card spot. I mean, theoretically, the idea is that the Islanders should be competing at that point, but who really knows because it's the Islanders. But in terms of young teams that are you can see this coming together, it's going to be the Flyers and the Rangers.
Yeah, it's very exciting. But back to the original point with Gostisbehere, it's just very strange that like you said, he came out of the gate as the next big thing, and now teams aren't really talking about him at all.
Yeah, and there's something to be said for changing the way you play when the way you play doesn't work, right? So if he can't put up the numbers, if he really focuses on getting better in his own end, and I think a perfect example of that is Nazem Kadri. When Kadri came into the league, he was supposed to be this high-flying, top-line center, putting up 80 points a year alongside Phil Kessel. And he couldn't. I mean, he never really cracked that offensive prowess that he had, I think, was with the London Knights. But then he changed his game. He became a gritty, sandpaper, irritant kind of guy.
And ironically enough, it led to him scoring more goals.
Right, exactly. And now he's fitting in perfectly with Colorado Avalanche. So there's something to be said for a guy like Gostisbehere. Maybe he looking in the mirror and be like, all right, I can't put up 40 to 50 points. I'm going to be, sturdy, stalwart in my own end, which is fine.
I mean, he's 2 years removed from, or almost 3 years removed now, from his 65-point campaign, right? But consistently he's been a 35 to 45-point guy. He had 46, 39, and 37. So if anything, this year really is the anomaly. It really is just this random dip in his play at 12 points in 41 games. I mean, he might hit 20 points, which, I mean, is not a good season for him by any stretch when you're expecting him to quarterback your power play the way he used to. But it's just very strange. And, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they traded him to a team and he, you saw, a resurgence of some kind because, I mean, all that pressure is going to be gone. He's not going to be the ghost bear. It's just gonna be all right. Well, we traded him here. He's got to play.
It also might be a mental thing. All of a sudden, oh my God, here comes Travis Sanheim and Ivan Provorov, and Matt Niskanen, who's got an offensive touch. Maybe to him it was well, I'm not the guy anymore.
Yeah, I mean, change of scenery is always. They always talk about a change of scenery is always just sometimes just is a good thing for guys. Just leaving.
Yeah, no, exactly. I'm very interested to see what happens with him. Very interested to see what happens with Matt Dumba, who's another kind of similar type of player where he's not what they thought they were drafting, but
I mean, he's good, but
he's a good player. He's a good nose to the grindstone, hard guy to play against, body checking type defenseman.
But then they're willing to trade him at 25, but they go and just sign Jake Spurgeon to that 6-year contract, and Jake Spurgeon's what 30.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, locking yourself into Jared Spurgeon isn't a bad thing, but locking yourself into Jared Spurgeon at 30 years old for 6 years is kind of a bad thing.
And then you go and trade Jason Zucker.
Yeah,
and it's like, what direction is this team going?
Yeah,
and clearly, sorry, not to keep cutting.
No,
you
it's
off.
fine.
Clearly, the narrative coming out was that they were looking to trade Mikko Koivu because it had to be reported that he didn't waive his no trade clause.
Right.
So, where are you going?
Yeah. I mean, that was the wild thing about David Backes getting traded was like I remember the Bruins asking him for the 8-team the 8-team trade list, and I was like, who wants David Backes for $6 million a year
for the next 2 years?
I was like, well, what is
you 1
that?
year after this year, but
yeah, I was like, what is that? And then he got traded, and I was like, hello, like who? But then like you see the trade, and it makes sense.
Like weaponizing the cap space.
Yeah, there's a bunch of other pieces there. It wasn't just like David Backes gets traded for like Andre Kasha. It's like. It was like David Backes was an afterthought to get the rest of the stuff that they wanted.
I could very well see a lot of teams kind of using Detroit, Anaheim, not really LA because they have a bunch of weird contracts, but Detroit and Anaheim as like dumping grounds for these bad contracts, and they'll do that all day long because Detroit and Anaheim can just stockpile draft
They'll
picks.
weaponize it, yeah.
I think Detroit has like 12 draft picks in the upcoming draft or something like that. Like, a lot of these teams just have stupid amounts of draft picks in the upcoming draft.
I mean, Steve Yzerman knows what he's doing. Like, he built that Tampa Bay Lightning team. Like, he knows what he's doing. So, if he feels this is the best way to get to where they got to go, then, I mean, I'm not going to doubt him.
Let's see.
And if taking on bad contracts to leverage teams for first-round picks and stuff, then, yeah, I mean, do it. Do it all day long. If they're like, hey, you want to take on this terrible Dustin Brown contract for us and we'll give you a first-round pick for it? And you're like, yes, absolutely. I'll leverage that for a first-round pick every day, all day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then it's smart because you're not going to be competitive for the next 5 years. So what's the big deal just letting these contracts go
and you're
out
not
the
gonna
door?
Have, like, you're not going to be signing any big names. Like, yeah, you'll sign Dylan Larkin and Anthony Mantha and maybe Philip Zadina and guys like that. But it's like, that's it. Like, you're not signing anybody else.
Montreal has 12 picks in the upcoming draft. 5 of them are in the first 3 rounds. They have their first. They have 3 second-round picks and a third, and then they have a bunch of fourths. Like, Montreal's stockpiling draft picks. I'm pretty sure Detroit has a good number of draft picks. The Ottawa Senators now have 12 draft picks. They have 2 firsts and 3 seconds and 2 thirds.
Yeah, and this draft is really deep to the first 2 rounds. So
I mean, conceivably, like and one of their first, by the way, is a San Jose Shark first. So that's probably going to be a good pick this year.
That's probably gonna be a top 10 pick. They're gonna have 2 top 10 picks.
Yeah, it's wild. Like, this upcoming draft is gonna be bonkers bananas.
The fact that Ottawa might end up with 2 top 10 picks in one draft is ridiculous.
I mean, right now the Senators, I think, are the second worst team in the East.
Yeah, Detroit's definitely the worst. Detroit's won like 12 games.
I was only not sure because I wasn't sure how bad the Devils are doing. The Devils have 58 points. Ottawa has 53. The San Jose Sharks are the 3rd worst team in the West, and they're only 1 point ahead of the Anaheim Ducks.
So yeah, that's sounds like a top 10 pick to me.
The Ottawa Senators are the 3rd worst team in the NHL. The San Jose Sharks are the 5th worst team in the NHL. You get a 3rd and a 5th.
Yeah, and you with the chance with the lottery to go up. I mean, they have a chance to get into that number 1. They have a chance to get a first overall pick and another top 5 pick out of this.
If Detroit gets screwed out of this first,
yeah,
I would just cry. I would just cry for Detroit.
Alexei Lafreniere. Oh my God, if they miss out on Alexei Lafreniere, but I mean, if they slide to number 2, they still get Quentin Byfield.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where it's like, just give him the pick.
Like, bro, just let him have it.
Such a horrible year. Just let him have the draft.
I mean, yeah, like I said, they have 9? They have 12 wins or whatever it is. Like,
they have 15 wins in 63 games.
Oh my God, they have a minus 108 goal differential. How did that happen? Like, seriously, like, how did that happen? Like, how do you give up? Wow.
The Detroit Red Wings this year have their first, their second, Washington second, their third, San Jose's third. So they don't have a ton of picks, but I mean,
they have a decent amount.
They might be able to acquire more picks if they just leverage that cap space.
And they should. They totally should.
Yeah, come on, give me Corey Schneider. Give me a first. I'll take your Corey contract off your hands.
Exactly. What do you want? Oh, you want Andres Athanasiou? All right, give me a first and a second, and yeah, I'll take Corey Schneider's off your hands, but you can have Andres Athanasiou.
Yeah, it's wild. This trade deadline has the potential to be. It's not like last year's where, up until really like the last month, we thought we were going to see the whole St. Louis Blues team get traded.
Yeah, I mean, like literally everybody was like, yeah.
There's not like as many big names. Like we don't have like a Stamkos on the market or like a Tavares on the market, but I mean we've discussed guys that could be moved, like a Tyson Barrie. That's a pretty decent name. You know, William Nylander in theory is excess to what they have at this point. You know, Chris Kreider, Kyle Palmieri, Matt Dumba, Shane Gostisbehere. Like we have a lot of like decent players, not a lot of big names, but I think that there's potential for like just total chaos.
Oh, absolutely.
If Colorado makes a big move for a forward or a goaltender, I think you're going to see an arms race.
Oh, yeah, no, 100%. Like you said, this has the potential to go absolutely nuclear. Like, everything can go wrong almost instantly. Like, it's all going to go sideways. Trade Center on Monday is either going to be really, really interesting, or it's going to be a snore fest. Like, they're going to be just, like, twiddling thumbs, or it's going to, like, 10 a.m. to like 3 p.m. is going to be the absolute most chaotic time of like the last 3 years. They're going to go absolutely nuclear.
And even if there's no like super big trades, which I think there will be, you know, I don't think Kyle Palmieri is staying in New Jersey.
They don't want to trade him, but like they have no choice really.
Why would a 29-year-old stay on a team that's not going to be good for 5 years?
It's also like his value is really high. Like he's got 22 goals. Like why would you keep him?
It's just the thing is, you know, we've seen most of the defensemen move. I mean, Dumba goes to spare and Josh Manson could still go.
Right.
Sammy Vatanen could still go.
Sammy Vatanen's probably gonna go.
But I think really it's the forwards that we're waiting because everyone's waiting to see, who are these forwards? Because like defenseman, it's like, okay, he's a defensive defenseman. Like, okay, I know what we're getting out of him. Or it's like, okay, he's like Andy Green. Like, I know what I'm getting at Andy Green.
Yeah, he's been doing it his whole career.
But it's always harder to trade forwards because it's like if they, especially scoring forwards, because if they flame out, then it's like now what?
It's like, what do I do now? I can't. What am I to teach like defense? Like,
so I think what we're gonna really see. I think we're gonna see one trade. If I had to make a prediction, I think Colorado is gonna be the first trade for a forward, and then you're just gonna see like everyone start snapping up forwards left and right.
Probably. I mean, it's what happened that one year at the draft when Anaheim got Ryan Kessler, and then everybody else in the Western Conference, like all like the big players, are just grabbing centers left and right.
What's because if you're Dallas right now, you're a Stanley Cup contender. If Colorado trades for Kyle Palmieri or Chris Kreider, you're like, great. Like I don't score goals right now as Dallas, and now I need to score more goals.
Like I have to go out and get like the other guy. I have to go out and try to get Chris Kreider or go get Kyle Palmieri or JG Pageau. Like I'm looking for something now.
Yeah, I think you can't make predictions for a trade deadline. But if I had to make a prediction, I think Colorado is going to be the first team to trade for a forward, given the position they're in, and given that Rantanen's been hurt twice now this year. They're probably going to want to shelter him a little bit, make sure he's fully healthy when he comes back.
Yeah.
I think Colorado's going to make a trade for a forward. I think we're going to see Colorado make a trade for a goaltender because I'm really not convinced at this point, given the just myriad of misinformation we've heard about Grubauer, that he's really all that healthy right now.
Yeah.
And why would you go and do a Stanley Cup fight with Pavel Francouz as your starter? No offense to him, but
like you really don't know what you're getting there.
So that's my prediction. I think Colorado's going to make a trade for a forward and a goaltender, and I think they're going to start the arms race at forward.
Yeah, I could see it. I mean, I think my prediction is less about a team, more about just overall like the thing. And I really think it's a seller's market this year.
Oh yeah,
because there are so many teams in the hunt that the very few teams that are out that have the assets can drive the value as much as they want because there are so many teams trying to grab these guys from them.
I mean, if we think about, the wild card in the West, really, I would say Minnesota's the last team that I would consider still in the hunt just because of how many points they have. Chicago has an outside shot, only being 6 points back. I don't think they're going to be buyers, but, that really only leaves 3 teams as bona fide non-playoff teams in San Jose, Anaheim, and LA. In the East, I think really the only bona fide non-playoff team at this point you're going to have Buffalo, Montreal, New Jersey, Ottawa, and Detroit. But that still leaves the Rangers could be not buyers, but they probably won't be sellers. You still got Florida, who desperately needs to make the playoffs. You still got Carolina, who needs to make the playoffs. Then, because of how close it is, I mean, the Islanders, the Blue Jackets, the Flyers, the Capitals, the Penguins, even at this point, the Toronto Maple Leafs, because they need to stay ahead of the Florida Panthers.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of teams in the market right now. I really think the only teams that can afford to kind of stay put, wouldn't be surprised if Boston's done. Wouldn't be surprised if Tampa Bay's done. Wouldn't be surprised if Washington and St. Louis hit pat. But I think Pittsburgh could do with a trade. I think, and then pretty much every other team down the line could do with a trade.
Yeah. I mean, really.
So, you have anything kind of last minute?
No. I
think... You just, congratulations to Alex Ovechkin.
Oh, yeah.
His 700th goal. Best pure goal scorer. Definitely in our generation, you can make the argument of all time.
Yeah.
Did it on a one-timer in a face-off circle.
What's more fitting, right?
What else is new? I think at this point his legacy is cemented as, really in terms of pure goal scorers, the only guys you can make an argument for over him might be Mike Bossy, Brett Hall. I really wouldn't, obviously Wayne wasn't a pure goal scorer. He was, more of an all-around playmaker type guy. So, yeah, I mean, really, he's probably... I would say the only, and this might be a little bit of bias, but the only guy that might be a better pure goal scorer of all time might be Mike Bossy, which was just unfortunate because we didn't get to see him play out his career.
Yeah.
But, I mean, he's definitely, come on.
It's Mike Bossy.
You can't argue Alex Ovechkin
at
this point. His career is cemented.
He's got
his Stanley Cup. So, congratulations, even though, unfortunately, we've had to get beat up by your one-timer from the circles for years.
The amount of playoff series the Rangers played with the Capitals in those mid-2010s was ridiculous.
And the amount of times that I had to see Ovechkin blowing by one-timers past subpar goaltending from the New York Islanders is painful. So congratulations to Ovi. Next week we'll probably do a trade deadline wrap-up.
Yeah.
And then the weeks after that, we're going to be leading up to the playoffs. It's going to get intense. And we're going to talk about where teams are at, where we're feeling going in the playoffs, and then we're going to hit playoffs and we're going to hit the ground running. It's going to be really exciting, so stay tuned for that. Next week, probably do a trade deadline wrap-up, and after that, we will start the march to the playoffs. So we'll see you guys next time.